Tonight we enter a room where history survives as marks pressed into clay. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, archaeologists working across ancient Mesopotamia uncovered thousands of tablets from ruined cities such as Nippur, Ur, and Nineveh. Scholars associated with institutions including the University of Pennsylvania Museum spent generations cleaning, cataloguing, translating, and comparing these fragments. What emerged was not one secret book explaining the Anunnaki, but something stranger and more interesting. The tablets preserved a world in which divine beings possessed immense authority. Yet that authority was rarely portrayed as limitless. Decisions were discussed, duties were assigned, oaths mattered, decrees carried consequences. Even gods could appear inside an order larger than themselves. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And wherever you are listening tonight, share your location and your local time. It is pleasant to imagine these ancient words crossing modern darkness to reach you. You stand, in imagination, beneath the hard sun of southern Mesopotamia. Heat trembles above fields cut by narrow canals. Mud brick walls rise from a flat horizon where almost no stone exists naturally. Reeds bend near slow water. Somewhere nearby, cattle shift heavily in the shade while insects murmur over the riverbank. The landscape looks fragile. Every harvest depends upon cooperation between people, water, soil, and season. A blocked canal can ruin fields. Too much water can destroy homes. Too little can turn cultivated ground into dust. Order is therefore not an abstract luxury, it is survival. Perhaps this helps explain why ancient Mesopotamian religion so often imagines existence itself as carefully organized. Inside a temple courtyard, your feet would feel packed earth beneath your sandals. Smoke from lamps and offerings would hang faintly in the warm air. Priests would move through controlled routines, following traditions inherited across generations. Above them, rising terraces and monumental walls would remind everyone that human society exists beneath something greater. The surviving texts reflect this same atmosphere. Records recovered from Nippur show that the city became one of the most important religious centers of ancient Sumerian culture. Its principal sanctuary was associated with Enlil, a divine figure connected with authority, wind, kingship, and the ordering of the world. Archaeological work conducted by teams connected with the University of Pennsylvania helped reveal enormous collections of tablets from this intellectual landscape. Among them were myths, hymns, administrative records, school exercises, legal documents, and religious composition. That mixture matters. Ancient scribes did not divide reality into neat modern categories. Religion, government, agriculture, law, and cosmic order flowed together. A ruler governed because the gods permitted kingship. A field prospered because proper human labour existed within divine order. A temple ceremony could support both political authority and the stability of the universe. You begin to sense the first important clue. The gods are powerful, but power is organised. Modern popular stories sometimes describe the Anunnaki as though they formed a single group of visitors arriving together with one technological mission. The actual Mesopotamian material is considerably less tidy. The term appears in different periods and contexts, and its meaning changes across centuries of religious tradition. Sometimes the Anunnaki are associated with a group of important deities. In later compositions, they can appear in connections that differ significantly from earlier Sumerian ideas. There is no surviving tablet that simply presents the modern story of extraterrestrial rulers arriving from another planet. Yet the genuine tradition contains its own mystery. The divine world behaves surprisingly like a political world. Gods gather in councils, senior figures hold greater authority, decisions can affect cities, kings, and humanity. Certain powers belong to particular divine figures. Responsibilities appear distributed rather than randomly seized. You might picture a human court because that is partly how ancient societies understood authority. Kings sat with advisors, elders judged disputes, officials managed grain, canals, workers, and land. It was natural for people living inside structured institutions to imagine heaven with structure as well. Still, the resemblance raises an intriguing possibility within the mythology itself. What happens when a divine being wants something that the larger order does not permit? This question is more useful than asking whether the gods were secretly astronauts. It comes directly from the logic of the ancient stories. Again and again, Mesopotamian narratives show divine personalities possessing desires, loyalties, rivalries, fears, and limits. A powerful god may become angry. Another may disagree. A decision may require consultation. A decree may become difficult to reverse. This is where the atmosphere changes slightly. Your fingers are fingers. In imagination, move across the edge of a clay tablet. The surface is cool despite the remembered heat outside. Tiny wedge-shaped impressions run in disciplined rows. Some signs remain sharp, others have broken away forever. The tablet does not whisper secrets. It preserves fragments. Scholars therefore work patiently, comparing copies and parallel compositions found at different archaeological sites. Researchers at Yale University and other major centres of ancient Near Eastern study have helped establish how complicated this textual tradition really is. One surviving version may differ from another. A damaged line can change interpretation. A word may carry several possible meanings depending upon context. There remains scholarly debate over how consistently ancient Mesopotamians imagined the divine assembly across different periods and cities. Some researchers emphasize shared religious structures, while others stress local traditions and historical change. That uncertainty is valuable. It prevents the past from becoming too convenient. There is also a curious fringe idea worth noticing. Provided you keep it clearly separate from established history, some modern writers claim that scattered references to divine assemblies preserve distorted memories of an advanced prehistoric civilization. Archaeology has not produced reliable evidence supporting that conclusion. Yet the popularity of the idea reveals something about us. We are uncomfortable with the unfinished stories. A broken tablet invites completion. A missing line becomes a doorway. An unfamiliar divine name can easily become whatever a modern reader hopes to find. But the authentic mystery requires less invention. Imagine a civilization whose people believe divine beings shape storms, kingship, fertility, disease, rivers, and destiny. These beings are terrifyingly powerful, yet the stories still place them inside councils, responsibilities, decrees, and inherited arrangements. Power does not necessarily mean freedom. That distinction settles quietly over the ancient landscape. Beyond the temple walls, evening approaches, the fierce brightness weakens, shadows stretch beside mud brick houses, cooking smoke rises slowly into a bronze-coloured sky. Somewhere, a scribe presses one final line into damp clay before setting the tablet aside. He cannot know who will read it. He cannot imagine museums, universities, electric lights, or distant listeners lying awake thousands of years later. He simply records a world whose order seems obvious to him. Heaven has ordained ranks them to a mere pennies. Authority has boundaries. Decisions have consequences. And somewhere within that structure stand the beings later called the Anunnaki. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is therefore not that ancient people remembered visitors from the stars. Perhaps it is that they imagined something even stranger, beings of enormous power who could still be restrained. Not restrained by stronger walls, not restrained by human weapons, restrained by order itself. You remain beside the silent tablet while darkness gathers beyond the doorway. Nothing on its surface promises a returning army of gods. Nothing announces a hidden date when the heavens will open. Instead, the clay preserves a quieter idea. There are powers, there are rules, and the two are not the same thing. You enter the imagined divine world not through a golden gate, but through the logic of administration. That may sound unexpectedly ordinary. Yet ancient Mesopotamia was a civilization obsessed with keeping things in their proper places. Fields had boundaries, temples possessed estates, workers received measured rations, officials recorded deliveries of grain, wool, animals, oil, and beer with remarkable patience. Order had weight. If a quantity changed, someone recorded it. If land belonged to a temple, its management mattered. If a king received authority, that authority needed recognition from powers considered greater than himself. The heavens reflected this mentality. You can almost hear a reed stylus pressing repeatedly into damp clay while an apprentice learns the names of gods. Outside, sandals scrape against a courtyard. A donkey complains somewhere beyond the wall. The smell of grain dust mixes with warm mud brick and lamp smoke. In this environment, divine power is rarely imagined as simple chaos. A storm may be terrifying, but even storms belong to particular powers. Rivers have divine associations. Fertility has guardians. Writing has sacred patrons. Kingship belongs within a larger supernatural arrangement. Different responsibilities occupy different places. One ancient composition concerning the organization of the world describes divine responsibilities being distributed across creation. Waters, crops, construction, animals, and other essential parts of civilized life receive supernatural oversight. Researchers studying Mesopotamian literature at major institutions, including the University of Pennsylvania, have long recognized this administrative quality within Sumerian religious imagination. The universe resembles an enormous estate. Someone oversees the water. Someone protects the grain. Someone establishes boundaries. Someone confirms authority. Even among gods, responsibilities are not endlessly interchangeable. You might naturally wonder why beings called divine would need responsibilities at all. A truly unlimited god would presumably require no assigned office, council, decree, or division of labor. But these gods are not presented like that. They are immensely powerful personalities inhabiting a structured cosmos. At the upper levels stands An, associated with heaven and ancient sovereignty. Enlil becomes one of the dominant figures of authority, especially within traditions centered upon Nippur. Enki appears as a figure of wisdom, fresh waters, craftsmanship, and cunning intelligence. Other divine figures hold their own spheres. These relationships vary with time and place because Mesopotamian religion develops across many centuries. Cities rise politically, dynasties disappear. Religious emphasis changes. Gods associated with successful political centers can gain wider importance. Heaven has politics. That statement may sound almost sarcastic, yet it captures something deeply human within these traditions. The divine world contains rank without perfect simplicity. A god may possess extraordinary influence while another god retains authority within a particular domain. Divine personalities cooperate, argue, persuade, complain, and occasionally maneuver around one another. This does not resemble absolute freedom. Instead, it resembles power inside a system. Imagine standing outside a great temple at Nippur as night gathers over the plain. The last heat leaves the walls slowly. You place your palm against a rough brick and feel the warmth trapped there from the afternoon sun. Above you lies an enormous field of stars. To a Sumerian observer, that sky is not empty space. It belongs inside a meaningful arrangement connecting divine activity, earthly order, ritual responsibility, and political legitimacy. A king cannot simply announce that reality belongs to him. His authority requires divine approval. Sumerian royal literature repeatedly presents kingship as something bestowed rather than independently invented. The ruler may command soldiers and workers, yet his legitimacy depends upon recognition from the sacred order surrounding him. That idea creates a remarkable hierarchy. Humans obey kings. Kings depend upon gods. Gods themselves participate within an organized divine structure. Where, then, does ultimate authority reside? The surviving texts never provide one tidy philosophical answer. Ancient Mesopotamian religion was not constructed as a modern textbook with numbered principles. It grew through ritual, poetry, local tradition, royal ideology, mythology, and generations of scribal interpretation. That leaves scholars with a fascinating problem. Some historians understand divine hierarchy mainly as a reflection of human political institutions. Powerful cities placed their patron gods near the summit because earthly influence shaped religious imagination. Other scholars place greater emphasis on inherited theological structures that survived political change with surprising resilience. The discussion remains open because the evidence comes from different cities, centuries, genres, and scribal communities. A hymn is not an administrative tablet. A myth is not a royal inscription. A temple prayer is not a legal contract. Yet together they reveal recurring concern with authority, allocation, judgment, and proper arrangement. This is where a peculiar modern interpretation sometimes appears. A fringe claim occasionally suggests that the divine hierarchy represents an actual command structure belonging to advanced non-human visitors. In some versions, these beings supposedly operated under regulations established somewhere beyond Earth. There is no accepted archaeological evidence proving that interpretation. No securely translated tablet gives historians a recognizable extraterrestrial legal code. No excavated archive explains that the Anunnaki received commands from a distant planetary government. The genuine material is subtler, and perhaps more haunting. Ancient people did imagine divine beings constrained by relationships, decisions, duties, and established arrangements. Those restraints did not need metal chains or guarded prisons. Authority itself could restrain. Think of a human ruler forbidden from entering certain sacred spaces except during appointed rituals. Nothing physical necessarily stops him. The boundary exists because crossing it would violate the structure making his kingship meaningful. The same principle can operate within mythology. A divine being may be capable of an action while still lacking the recognized authority to perform it. Capability and permission are different things. Your modern mind may instinctively merge them. If someone possesses enough power, you assume that person can simply ignore every restriction. Mesopotamian thought often seems less comfortable with that assumption. Power without order threatens a civilization. A river without boundaries becomes floodwater. A king without justice becomes oppression. A household without responsibility collapses. A city without maintained canals eventually loses its fields. Perhaps the cosmos follows the same pattern. The gods may command frightening forces, yet those forces remain meaningful because they occupy an ordered world. Even Enlil, whose authority can appear overwhelming, does not exist as the only divine will. Other gods retain identities, interests, responsibilities, and voices, and the ancient imagination therefore contains a tension. Divine power is immense. Divine independence is less certain. You remain beneath the cooling night sky while distant water moves quietly through an irrigation channel. Somewhere, a temple door closes with the dull sound of wood meeting stone. Nothing dramatic happens. The stars remain where they are. Yet the question grows more precise. If the ancient gods lived within an organized cosmic structure, then the greatest restraint upon them might never have been weakness. It might have been legitimacy. A being could possess strength enough to cross a boundary and still remain forbidden from crossing it. A god could have power without permission. And in a civilization where order held back both political chaos and literal floodwater, that distinction could carry the weight of the world. The name appears quietly in clay. You do not hear trumpets announcing visitors from another world. You do not find a landing place marked beside a river, nor instructions describing machines descending through the atmosphere. Instead, you encounter a divine collective. The Anunnaki emerge within Mesopotamian religious literature as a group of gods whose identities and functions change across long stretches of time. Their presence is real within the surviving texts, but their character is far less simple than modern retellings often suggest. You picture a scribe bending over fresh clay in the filtered light of a temple school. His fingers smell faintly of damp earth. A reed stylus rests between them, while students nearby repeat signs they have copied many times. Outside, sunlight presses against the walls. Inside, divine names accumulate. The Anunnaki are not introduced through a single surviving creation document explaining exactly who they are. Their name appears across different compositions written and copied over many centuries. That immediately creates difficulty. Modern readers prefer fixed definitions. We enjoy tidy categories, preferably with diagrams, labels, and a helpful arrow pointing toward the mysterious beings. Ancient religion rarely cooperates. In early Sumerian literary traditions, the Anunnaki can appear as an assembly of important gods connected with the wider divine order. The term is commonly understood by scholars as referring to descendants or offspring associated with the great sky god An. This does not mean every text presents an identical membership list. There is no surviving ancient register resembling a passport office for the gods. Different compositions emphasize different divine figures according to literary purpose, city tradition, and historical period. Researchers working with major cuneiform collections at institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania and Yale University have helped reconstruct these traditions from thousands of separate fragments. Their work establishes a basic historical fact. The Anunnaki belong firmly to Mesopotamian mythology. What archaeology does not establish is equally important. No accepted Sumerian text identifies them as inhabitants of a planet approaching Earth on a scheduled orbit. No mainstream translation describes them engineering humanity through advanced genetic technology. No securely understood inscription presents their divine titles as technical ranks aboard spacecraft. Those ideas belong to modern interpretation. The ancient material follows another path. Consider one of the most famous Sumerian compositions concerning the goddess Inanna and her descent into the realm of the dead. Within that strange and unsettling story, the Anunnaki appear as powerful judges associated with the underworld. 7 of them are described in a judicial role. You can almost feel the temperature drop as the narrative moves downward through successive gates. Jewelry and garments are removed. Authority is stripped away piece by piece, and the realm beneath the earth obeys rules that even a great goddess cannot casually ignore. The Anunnaki there are not celestial engineers. They judge. This judicial association becomes particularly significant because it places some members of the divine group inside a setting defined by boundaries and consequences. Yet another composition may portray the group differently. That variation is not a mistake. Mesopotamian religion developed across more than 2,000 years, passing through Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian cultural environments. Divine identities could merge, expand, contract, or acquire new associations. A god important in one city might appear differently somewhere else. The Anunnaki therefore resist a single permanent description. Scholars continue debating exactly how the term changed between earlier Sumerian traditions and later Akkadian literature. Some interpretations emphasize a broad assembly of major deities. Others note the increasingly strong association between certain Anunnaki and the world of the dead. The evidence encourages caution. A name can survive while its meaning shifts. You already understand this instinctively from ordinary human culture. Titles change meaning, institutions change purpose. Ancient names acquire new associations while preserving something of their earlier prestige. Imagine hearing the word Senate across several civilizations. The word may remain familiar, yet the people, powers, procedures, and political circumstances surrounding it can differ enormously. The Anunnaki present a similar challenge. Later Babylonian literature sometimes places them within much larger divine populations. Certain texts distinguish heavenly and lower divine groups, while others arrange divine beings according to functions that do not match earlier Sumerian compositions perfectly. This complexity is inconvenient for simple theories. It is also fascinating. A particularly curious modern tidbit developed during the 20th century, when popular writers began identifying the Anunnaki with extraterrestrial visitors. These interpretations often combined ancient names with ideas about lost planets, artificial human creation, and forgotten astronomical knowledge. The resulting story became remarkably influential. It spread through books, documentaries, internet forums, and eventually popular culture. For many people, the modern extraterrestrial version became more familiar than the original Mesopotamian texts. That reversal is almost poetic. A civilization leaves behind hundreds of thousands of clay tablets, and modern imagination still manages to give the gods an interplanetary travel itinerary. Yet dismissing the modern story does not remove the genuine mystery, it sharpens it. The historical Anunnaki occupy a universe where divine identity is tied to status, ancestry, judgment, sacred geography, and collective authority. They are rarely solitary wanderers. They belong to relationships. That detail becomes increasingly important when you imagine what divine action means within such a worldview. If a god belongs to an assembly, that god possesses a place within something larger. If divine beings conceive as judges, judgment itself becomes a cosmic principle rather than merely a human invention. If membership changes between traditions, then the concept may represent not one fixed tribe of beings, but a category of divine authority. Your mind drifts toward the dark interior of a temple archive. Shelves once hold clay tablets stacked in baskets or arranged against walls. Labels identify groups of documents. Some contain accounts of Bali, others preserve hymns sung for kings. A few hold stories whose images will survive longer than the cities themselves. Dust settles over everything. Centuries pass. Roofs collapse. Conquerors arrive and vanish. Languages change. The tablets remain underground. When they finally return to human hands, their message is complicated enough to resist easy answers. The Anunnaki were gods. But what kind of gods depends upon the text you are reading. They could stand among great divine powers. They could participate in assemblies. They could become connected with judgment and the underworld. Their collective identity could shift as Mesopotamian theology changed. This makes one possibility within the ancient worldview especially intriguing. Perhaps their importance never depended upon unlimited freedom. Perhaps it depended upon recognized position. A judge possesses authority because a system recognizes the judgment. A ruler commands because kingship gives the command legitimacy. A divine assembly matters because its members stand inside an accepted cosmic arrangement. Remove that recognition, and even great power becomes something different. You imagine the clay tablet resting beneath your fingertips. The signs do not reveal extraterrestrial coordinates. They reveal something quieter. A divine name can carry enormous authority without describing absolute independence. The Anunnaki enter history not as beings outside the ancient cosmic system, but as beings deeply embedded within it. And that distinction changes the mystery completely. Your attention settles upon something more difficult to see than a god. It has no face carved into stone, no temple belongs entirely to it, no priest carries its image through crowded streets beneath music and incense. Yet authority seems to gather around it. You are looking for the principle that makes authority legitimate. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings could command armies, organize labor, build temples, dig canals, punish criminals, and redirect the wealth of entire cities. Their monuments often present them with impressive confidence. Still, a king did not usually describe himself as the inventor of kingship. Kingship came from elsewhere. Ancient compositions repeatedly portray royal authority as something granted by the divine world. A ruler may sit upon a throne, but the institution surrounding that throne belongs to a sacred order, imagined as older than the individual occupying it. The distinction is quiet yet profound. The king rules. Kingship precedes him. You walk through an imagined palace courtyard while morning light spreads across plastered walls. Servants carry baskets. Officials pass with tablets tucked beneath their arms. Somewhere inside, a judge hears disputes over land, inheritance, debt, or damaged property. Everything depends upon recognized roles. A seal means something because people accept its authority. A boundary stone matters because the community recognizes the claim recorded upon it. A royal command carries force because the ruler occupies an acknowledged position within a larger structure. Mesopotamian mythology pushes this logic upward. The gods themselves possess offices, domains, titles, and forms of precedence. This suggests that sacred authority is not simply raw strength. It is placement within an order. One important historical example comes from the Sumerian king list, a remarkable literary composition preserved in several ancient copies. Scholars at Oxford University and other major centres of Mesopotamian research have studied its complicated mixture of political memory, ideology, and legendary kingship. The text famously presents kingship as descending from heaven. Its earliest rulers receive reign lengths so enormous that modern historians do not treat them as ordinary chronological records. Later portions move gradually towards rulers who can be connected more closely with historical dynasties. The document therefore sits between memory and myth. Its importance is not that every number should be read literally. Its importance lies in the assumption beneath the story. Kingship exists as a transferable institution. Cities may lose it. Other cities may receive it. Human rulers do not own the principle itself. You might imagine kingship as a torch passed between cities while the flame belongs to something greater than any hand carrying it. That image would have suited a landscape where political fortune changed frequently. Uruk could rise. Ur could dominate. Lagash could flourish. Akkad could transform the political world. Then another dynasty could take control. Human power moved. Sacred legitimacy needed an explanation for that movement. Ancient scribes provided one by placing political authority inside a cosmic framework. This creates a peculiar question. If kingship can exist beyond kings, could divine authority also depend upon principles existing beyond particular gods? Scholars would answer carefully. There is no surviving philosophical treatise stating that Mesopotamian gods obeyed an impersonal supreme constitution. Ancient religion was expressed through stories, rituals, hymns, prayers, and inherited theological traditions rather than systematic legal philosophy. Still, the texts frequently distinguish between a divine personality and the powers associated with that personality. That distinction appears vividly in traditions involving sacred decrees and assigned functions. The universe contains roles that can be granted, transferred, guarded, or recognized. A god may hold authority over something without having created the very concept of authority from nothing. This is where the ancient world begins to feel unexpectedly deep. You smell cedar smoke rising from a sanctuary. A priest pours water into a vessel. The liquid catches a narrow beam of sunlight before disappearing into shadow. Around him, ritual actions follow established patterns. He does not improvise because he feels inspired that morning. Correct procedure matters. A festival occurs at an appointed time. An offering requires an accepted form. Sacred objects occupy particular spaces. Words are spoken according to tradition. Ritual itself becomes evidence of a universe governed through proper relationships. Researchers at Yale University have emphasized how Mesopotamian religious practice connected divine presence with carefully maintained institutions. Archaeological records also show temple organizations functioning as major economic centers, managing land, workers, livestock, and stored goods. The sacred and practical were deeply intertwined. Order fed people. Order also pleased the gods. A quirky modern theory takes this observation in a far more speculative direction. Some fringe writers suggest that ancient references to heavenly kingship preserve memories of an advanced governing system imposed upon early humanity by non-human rulers. There is no reliable archaeological evidence establishing such a forgotten administration. The theory often treats poetic language as technical reporting, which historians generally reject. Yet the ancient concept remains intriguing without that interpretation. Authority descends. Authority can move. Authority does not belong permanently to one earthly ruler. You begin to see why this matters when thinking about beings far more powerful than kings. Suppose a divine figure possesses tremendous strength, knowledge, or influence. That power might allow extraordinary action. But the ancient worldview asks another question. Does that figure possess the right to act? Those are not identical conditions. A general may command thousands of soldiers yet still require authorization to begin a campaign. A judge may possess authority inside a courtroom but not beyond every boundary of society. A king may rule a city and still seek divine approval. Power occupies a place. The open scholarly debate concerns how literally ancient Mesopotamians understood these arrangements. Some researchers view cosmic hierarchy largely as a projection of palace and temple administration onto heaven. Others argue that religious concepts shaped political assumptions just as strongly as political institutions shape religion. The direction of influence may never be perfectly separated. Perhaps both processes are closer together. Human beings organized cities while imagining the gods organizing existence. Each structure helped explain the other. Your footsteps carry you towards the edge of the city as evening settles over irrigated fields. Workers return along narrow paths. Water moves between mud banks with a soft, persistent sound. Beyond the cultivated land lies open country where human control quickly becomes uncertain. The contrast is unmistakable. Inside the canals, life is arranged. Beyond them, disorder waits. For ancient communities, civilization required boundaries that had to be renewed constantly. Canals needed clearing, walls required repair, laws needed enforcement, rituals had to be performed again and again. Order was never effortless. Perhaps cosmic order was imagined the same way. Not merely as a command spoken once, but as a continuing arrangement requiring recognition from gods and humans alike. The oldest authority in such a world may not be a particular ruler. It may be the pattern allowing rulership to exist. And if divine beings receive offices, inherit domains, enter councils, or operate through established sacred functions, then even they may stand beneath principles they cannot casually erase. The night air cools against your skin. Far away, a temple platform rises dark against the stars. A king may sleep behind guarded walls, Priests may finish their final rituals. Clay tablets may rest silently inside storerooms. Yet the institution surrounding them feels older than any individual name. Kings disappear. Dynasties collapse. Cities become ruins. The idea of ordered authority survives them all. Perhaps that is the deeper power hidden in the ancient texts. Not a stronger god waiting above weaker gods, something quieter. A structure that makes power meaningful in the first place. Your hand reaches toward an idea that ancient scribes treated almost like a possession. It could be held. It could be transferred. It could apparently be lost. These mysterious powers are commonly known through a Sumerian term that scholars translate imperfectly as divine decrees, ordinances, powers, or fundamental attributes of civilization. No single English expression captures their full meaning. That uncertainty is part of their fascination. Imagine dawn touching the waterways around the ancient city of Eridu. Reed beds tremble in a warm breeze. Fish disturb the surface of quiet canals. Moist earth carries the smell of river mud beneath a sky slowly brightening with heat. Within this landscape stands the sanctuary of Enki. He is associated with wisdom, fresh water, craftsmanship, clever planning, and the mysterious foundation supporting civilized life. In literary tradition, his residence contains powers connected with the organization of the human and divine worlds. These powers are not merely commandments. They resemble established capacities. Kingship can belong among them, priesthood can belong among them, music, craftsmanship, truth, judgment, sexuality, warfare, and various social institutions appear within lists associated with these divine powers. Civilization itself seems divided into pieces. The image is extraordinary. Instead of imagining society developing entirely through human experimentation, Sumerian mythology portrays fundamental institutions as belonging to a sacred inventory already woven into cosmic existence. Writing belongs somewhere. Justice belongs somewhere. Music belongs somewhere. Even troublesome aspects of civilization have their appointed place. This gives the universe an almost architectural quality. Researchers associated with the University of Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania have examined literary compositions showing how Sumerian scribes connected divine authority with these established cultural powers. The surviving tablets demonstrate that Mesopotamian thinkers imagined civilization through categories whose legitimacy extended beyond ordinary human preference. The clearest narrative appears in a famous Sumerian story involving Enki and Inanna. You enter the scene quietly. Inanna travels to Eridu, where Enki welcomes her with food and drink. The atmosphere becomes surprisingly festive for a story carrying enormous theological consequences. Enki begins granting important divine powers to her. One follows another. Kingship, priestly offices, crafts, music, judgment, forms of knowledge. The list expands into a bewildering catalogue of civilization. The story contains an almost humorous detail. Enki is drinking during this generous distribution, which has encouraged generations of readers to wonder whether divine administration occasionally suffered from the same weaknesses as human administration. Apparently, cosmic bureaucracy also benefits from careful hospitality. Inanna accepts what she receives. She places the powers aboard her boat and departs toward Uruk. Enki later realizes what has happened. He sends divine servants to recover them. But Inanna continues toward her city, protecting the precious cargo until the powers reach Uruk successfully. For ancient audiences, the tale helped explain the sacred prestige of Uruk and its institutions. Yet underneath the political meaning sits something unusual. The powers can move. They appear attached neither permanently to Enki nor automatically to a single city. They can be granted. They can be transported. They can become established somewhere new. That makes them different from simple personality traits. Enki does not hand Inanna his intelligence or remove a portion of his own identity. He transfers recognized powers associated with organized existence. You hear water touching the side of the boat. Wood creaks gently. The vessel moves through the canal, while its invisible cargo contains the structure of civilization itself. Perhaps kingship rests somewhere between baskets and sacred objects. Perhaps music travels beside judgment. The mythology is strange because abstractions behave almost like treasures. Ancient storytellers make invisible institutions tangible. This may tell you something important about how authority was understood. A king does not create kingship merely by becoming strong. A priest does not invent sacred office merely by wearing ceremonial garments. An institution carries legitimacy because it participates in an established pattern. The divine decrees represent that pattern in mythological form. Their precise nature remains debated among specialists. Some scholars emphasize that the original Sumerian concept includes divine ordinances governing cosmic and social functions. Others warn that translating the term as laws makes it sound too much like a modern legal code. Another interpretation treats these powers as cultural attributes that define ordered civilization. There is no perfect English equivalent. That scholarly disagreement matters because modern readers often hear the word decree and imagine written legislation. The ancient idea seems broader. A decree may describe not simply a rule telling someone what to do, but the authorized condition allowing a function to exist properly. You might compare it to the difference between a law governing a court and the institution of judgment itself. The distinction is subtle. It changes everything. Suppose a divine being controls warfare because warfare belongs within an assigned sacred function. That deity possesses terrible influence, but the function still exists within an ordered network of powers. Suppose another deity governs wisdom. Wisdom is not everything. Each domain has boundaries. The divine war becomes a mosaic rather than a single unrestricted will. This is where fringe interpretations become especially imaginative. Some modern writers describe the Sumerian divine powers as technological devices, data packages, or advanced tools transferred between competing non-human factions. The boat journey has even been interpreted as the transportation of physical technology. Archaeology provides no convincing support for that reading. The tablets describe sacred and social concepts using mythological language, not identifiable machinery. Still, the physical imagery remains curious. Why portray abstract powers as things that can be loaded onto a vessel? Perhaps because stories require movement. Perhaps because temple wealth and royal insignia were familiar symbols of authority. Or perhaps ancient storytellers simply understood that ownership becomes emotionally powerful when an idea can be stolen, carried, protected, and received. You watch the imaginary boat approach Uruk. The city rises above the plain with walls, shrines, workshops, houses, markets, and temple precincts. Smoke drifts over rooftops. Craftspeople hammer metal. Potters turn clay beneath skilled hands. Civilization makes noise. Every activity appears separate, yet mythology binds them together beneath sacred authorization. The city does not merely contain people. It contains functions. Those functions possess an appointed place within existence. Such a worldview produces an unexpected limitation upon divine action. If important powers are assigned rather than limitless, then possessing divine status does not automatically provide authority over every function. One god may influence storms without controlling judgment. Another may hold wisdom without owning kingship. A divine assembly may recognize structures that no individual member can redefine casually. The restraint becomes conceptual rather than physical. Nothing needs to lock a gate. The gate exists because certain powers belong on one side of it. Nothing needs to chain a god. A god may simply lack the sacred authority attached to a particular function. You feel evening air moving across the city walls as workshops gradually quiet. The invisible architecture of civilization remains. Priesthood continues because its role is recognized. Judgment continues because disputes require settlement. Music continues because ritual and celebration need sound. Kingship continues because political order demands a center. Ancient mythology gathers these functions and imagines them as sacred powers distributed through the world. Perhaps a higher law begins here, not as a stone tablet hanging above the gods, not as a hidden ruler issuing commands from somewhere beyond the stars. It begins as structure. Every power has a place. Every office has a boundary. Every gift carries an authorized purpose. And even divine hands may possess only what the order allows them to hold. The air over Nippur feels different when Enlil enters the imagination. You stand beside a broad, sacred enclosure while dry wind presses dust against the walls. Somewhere inside, priests carry offerings through shaded courtyards. Wooden doors creak softly. The scent of baked grain and burning oil hangs beneath the midday heat. This city belongs especially to Enlil. He is not simply another divine personality occupying a convenient place in a crowded pantheon. For long periods of Mesopotamian history, his sanctuary at Nippur becomes one of the most important religious centers in the region. Kings seek recognition there. Dynasties rise elsewhere, yet Nippur retains extraordinary prestige. That fact matters. Archaeological excavations associated with the University of Pennsylvania revealed extensive remains and tablet collections from Nippur, helping historians reconstruct its importance as a religious and intellectual center. The city was rarely the permanent capital of a great territorial empire, yet rulers repeatedly treated it as sacred. Political power could move from city to city. Enlil's authority appeared more durable. You begin to sense why a conquering king might care about a temple located beyond his own palace walls. Military strength can seize a city. It cannot automatically produce legitimus. A ruler who wishes to appear rightful needs recognition from the sacred structure his subjects already understand. Enlil becomes deeply connected with that recognition. Sumerian royal hymns frequently describe kings as chosen, favored, or appointed through divine authority. Enlil can grant kingship, establish destiny, and elevate rulers within the cosmic order. His power is immense. Yet even here, the language remains interesting. He grants, he confirms, he determines. These are actions of authority rather than simple physical force. You imagine a king entering a temple precinct while attendants fall silent around him. He possesses soldiers, treasure, servants, and walls, yet inside the sanctuary, he approaches something his army cannot manufacture. Approval. The entire performance depends upon hierarchy. A human ruler stands beneath a divine ruler. But Enlil himself also operates inside relationships involving other great gods, assemblies, established powers, and inherited cosmic functions. This is not a universe built around one isolated personality. Authority has less. The character of Enlil reflects those layers particularly well. He can be stern. Some compositions present him as the source of devastating decisions. Others celebrate him as the force establishing abundance, order, and legitimate kingship. The same god can inspire gratitude and fear. That combination would have felt familiar to people living under powerful rulers. A king protects irrigation canals and maintains justice. The same king can demand labour and taxes. Authority provides stability, but stability has a price. Enlil embodies that uncomfortable balance on a cosmic scale. One Sumerian myth tells a surprisingly human story about him. A young Enlil sees the goddess Ninlil near a canal. What follows leads to consequences serious enough that Enlil is expelled from the divine community and sent away from his privileged place. The details vary according to interpretation, and the ancient composition contains elements that modern readers find morally difficult. What matters for this investigation is the structural point. A major god can face consequences. Enlil is powerful enough to hold extraordinary authority, yet the story does not portray power as protection from every sanction. The community of gods matters. Rules matter. Status does not erase responsibility. Researchers at Oxford University and Yale University have examined such myths as evidence for the ways Mesopotamian storytellers explored divine society through ideas resembling human institutions. The resemblance should not be pushed too far. Gods are not ordinary citizens appearing before an earthly court. Still, the narrative repeatedly imagined them within networks of expectation. This creates an important scholarly debate. Some historians interpret Enlil's authority primarily through the political realities surrounding Nippur. They argue that his theological importance grew because rulers needed a sacred center capable of validating power across competing cities. Others emphasize much older religious traditions in which Enlil already represented fundamental cosmic authority, independent of later political convenience. Both views can coexist to some degree. Religion can shape politics, while politics reshapes religion. Ancient societies rarely keep those worlds separate. You hear wind moving along the temple roof. The sound seems appropriate for a god associated with air and atmosphere. Enlil's name became connected in later interpretation with immense natural and sovereign forces, yet he is not usually portrayed as an unpredictable storm simply doing whatever he wishes. He acts through decision. He speaks decrees. He establishes destinies. That language suggests administration at the highest imaginable level. A curious fringe interpretation pushes this idea into modern speculation. Some writers have portrayed Enlil as the commander of an extraterrestrial faction, sometimes presenting disagreements among Mesopotamian gods as political disputes between technologically advanced visitors. No accepted archaeological evidence demonstrates such a scenario. Ancient texts do describe rivalries and divine decisions, but those narratives belong within Mesopotamian religion, rather than a verified record of interplanetary government. The authentic Enlil remains more compelling. He represents authority that depends upon position. Suppose you remove the temple's hymns, divine assembly, appointed powers and concept of destiny surrounding him. What remains? Strength, perhaps? Fear, perhaps. But authority becomes harder to define. A ruler is not merely the strongest person in a palace. A judge is not merely someone capable of punishment. Authority exists when an ordered system recognizes a right to command. Enlil's greatness therefore reveals something subtle about Mesopotamian ideas. Even the highest command has context. You walk toward the outer edge of Nippur as afternoon light becomes pale gold. Farmers move beside canals carrying tools over their shoulders. Children lead animals toward enclosed yards. Dust settles across paths travelled for generations. These ordinary lives depend upon predictability. Water must arrive. Fields must be measured. Disputes must be settled. Harvests must be stored. In the religious imagination, cosmic authority performs a similar task. It keeps existence from dissolving into uncertainty. That may explain why divine command appears so closely connected with destiny. Destiny in Mesopotamian thought is not merely a private future waiting for one person. It can concern cities, rulers, gods, and institutions. To determine destiny is therefore to establish what may properly happen. The distinction matters enormously. A powerful being might desire an outcome. A decree of destiny determines whether that outcome belongs within the recognized order. Desire and destiny can conflict. Even bestowing desire, you let that possibility remain quietly in the warm evening air. Perhaps the most formidable power imagined by ancient scribes was not strength enough to destroy walls or command storms. Perhaps it was the authority to decide what could legitimately occur. Enlil stands close to that authority, yet the stories surrounding him also suggest that great status does not automatically dissolve every boundary. The ruler of commands can still inhabit a commanded universe. The giver of destinies can still exist inside a structure where destiny itself carries weight. And if a god as formidable as Enlil can be imagined within such limits, then divine power may never have meant absolute freedom at all. Your fingers brush against a wall of woven reeds. It is an ordinary surface, the sort of thing a farmer might build beside a simple house. Sunlight slips through narrow gaps, dust gathers along the fibres. Somewhere nearby, water moves quietly through a canal bordered by date palms. Yet in one of Mesopotamia's strangest stories, a wall like this becomes a loophole. The god Enki is nearby. In later Akkadian traditions, he is closely associated with Ea, the wise deity who repeatedly survives dangerous situations through intelligence rather than brute force. His stories reveal a world where divine decisions may be powerful, but clever interpretation can sometimes change their consequences. That difference matters. A command may exist. Obedience may still contain choices. You find this tension vividly in Mesopotamian flood traditions. One important version survives in the story commonly called atrahasis. Clay tablets preserving the narrative were copied in ancient Mesopotamia, and generations of specialists at institutions including the University of Oxford have studied its relationship with other flood traditions. The story begins with a crisis among divine beings. Humanity becomes troublesome. The problem is not presented exactly the same way in every surviving tradition, but noise and overpopulation become central concerns in the atrahasis narrative. Divine authorities attempt to reduce humanity through disaster. Disease comes. Famine follows. Drought threatens survival. Each time, Ea provides guidance that allows humans to endure. His behavior is revealing. He does not simply march into the divine council and announce that its authority means nothing. He works around decision. When destruction threatens through disease, he offers a strategy. When starvation approaches, he provides another. Wisdom operates inside the cracks of authority. Eventually, a greater decision is made. A flood will destroy humanity. The gods bind themselves to secrecy concerning the plan. Now Ea faces a problem. He wishes to preserve his human servant, yet an oath restricts what he may reveal. You can almost hear the silence surrounding him. The decision exists. The oath exists. The human remains unaware. Then intelligence begins searching for space between the words. He approaches a reed wall. He addresses the wall rather than directly addressing the man who needs the warning. The human happens to hear is one of the most remarkable pieces of divine legal maneuvering in ancient mythology. Technically, Ea speaks to reeds. Practically, the intended listener receives the message. You might permit yourself a faint smile here. Human bureaucracy has spent thousands of years discovering similar distinctions. No rule was broken, someone eventually explains. The rule was merely approached from an unusually creative direction. Yet the scene is more than ancient comedy. It reveals something fundamental about how the story imagines divine constraint. Why does Ea require a trick at all? If power alone governed divine behavior, he could simply ignore the oath. Instead, the narrative makes the restriction meaningful enough that even the god of wisdom needs a strategy. He does not destroy the boundary. He bends around it. The surviving traditions show that Enki and Ea were associated with wisdom, craft, fresh water, ritual knowledge, and protective cunning, specialists have long recognized his repeated role as a problem solver within Mesopotamian literature. His intelligence frequently protects life, but protection does not always appear as open rebellion. Sometimes it appears as interpretation. That creates a very different picture from a battle between unrestricted supernatural factions. A direct rebel attacks the law. A clever divine advisor discovers what the law actually permits. The distinction becomes almost legal. You imagine an ancient scribe appreciating the joke. Perhaps he has watched officials argue over contracts. Perhaps he knows merchants who understand precisely how much silver a phrase requires them to pay. Perhaps he has seen property disputes turn upon one carefully chosen word. Ancient Mesopotamia produced enormous quantities of legal and administrative documentation. Contracts mattered. Witnesses mattered. Oaths mattered. Precise language mattered. It is hardly surprising that divine stories could contain similar sensitivity to wording. A peculiar modern interpretation has transformed Enki into something resembling a secret revolutionary. Some fringe writers present him as the sympathetic leader of a non-human faction that supposedly opposed harsher beings who wanted humanity controlled or destroyed. Within that version, his protection of humans becomes evidence of an ancient conflict between rival extraterrestrial groups. The archaeological record does not establish that scenario. The original stories already explain his actions through Mesopotamian theology, divine relationships, wisdom, and ritual ideas. Yet the popularity of the rebel interpretation reflects a genuine feature of his character. Enki frequently complicates authority. He sees possibilities other beings miss. He preserves what harsher decisions might erase. He recognizes that a decree can have consequences its makers did not fully consider. That makes him dangerous in a very particular way. Not because he possesses the greatest force, because he understands boundaries. A locked door troubles the strong person. The clever person studies the hinges. The open scholarly debate becomes especially interesting here. Researchers continue discussing how closely the surviving Sumerian flood account involving Ziusudra should be connected with later Akkadian versions involving Atrahasis and other flood heroes. The stories clearly belong to related Mesopotamian traditions, yet differences in language, theology, surviving condition, and narrative emphasis prevent scholars from treating every version as one identical account. The broken nature of some tablets makes certainty even harder. Still, a recurring pattern remains visible. Divine plans encounter divine disagreement. The preservation of humanity can depend upon communication that avoids openly violating a sacred decision. That pattern gives the concept of higher law unusual texture. A rule powerful enough to restrain a god does not need to make the god helpless. It merely changes the way the god must act. You stand near the reed wall as darkness begins gathering across the marshes. Frogs call from shallowed water. A bird settles somewhere among the reeds. Cool air carries the smell of wet earth through the settlement. The wall itself looks unimpressive. No inscription marks it. No priest guards it. Yet mythology turns it into the boundary between silence and survival. On one side stands an oath. On the other stands a human who must somehow receive forbidden knowledge. Enki finds the narrow passage between them. Perhaps that is why his stories remain so compelling. Absolute power requires little imagination. Restricted power requires intelligence. If even divine wisdom must respect certain forms, then the cosmos described by these myths contains something stronger than individual desire. Not necessarily a greater person. Not necessarily another god. Possibly a binding structure of agreements, decrees, and consequences that cannot simply be dismissed. Enki does not prove that such a universal law existed as a formal doctrine. The tablets do not offer that convenient certainty. They offer something so cool. A god wants to act. A restriction stands in his path. The restriction remains meaningful. So the god whispers to a wall. You wake, in imagination, beneath a sky still pale with first light. The ground is cool for only a little while. Soon the heat will rise, settling over the fields, canals, brick walls, and crowded courtyards of southern Mesopotamia. A worker lifts a basket. Another bends beside a canal. Someone carries grain toward a storehouse while a supervisor marks quantities onto wet clay. Human life is organized around labor. That is not merely a social fact. In Mesopotamian mythology, labor becomes part of the explanation for why human beings exist at all. One of the clearest surviving accounts appears in the Akkadian story known as Atrahasis. The composition belongs to a long tradition preserved on clay tablets, and scholars at institutions including Yale University and the University of Oxford have studied its language, chronology, and relationship with other Mesopotamian creation stories. Its beginning is unexpectedly practical. The gods are working, not symbolically. They are described as performing heavy labor. They dig canals. They maintain waterways. They carry the burden of creating and sustaining the ordered world. The image would have felt painfully familiar to ancient audiences. Canal maintenance was exhausted. Silt had to pay for. Banks had to be repaired. Channels had to remain open. Without that work, agriculture failed. The gods in the story become tired. Their resentment grows. Eventually, the divine workers rebel against the higher authorities. They surround the dwelling of Enlil and demand relief from their burden. This is an extraordinary moment. The problem that produces humanity is not loneliness. It is not curiosity. It is labor. The divine world needs workers. You can almost hear the scrape of baskets across dry soil. The mythology turns one of the harshest realities of ancient life into a cosmic event. A solution is proposed. A new creature will be made. That creature will carry the workload. Humanity enters the story as a labouring species. The idea can sound unsettling to modern ears because people often prefer creation myths that place humanity at the emotional centre of the universe. This one offers a colder arrangement. Humans are useful. They relieve divine exhaustion. They maintain the world through work. The purpose is not presented as meaningless cruelty, however. Labour supports civilization. Fields must be irrigated. Temples require offerings. Cities need food. Animals must be tended. Canals connect communities. Work sustains order. Human beings become participants in that order because they perform tasks the gods no longer wish to carry themselves. The creation process itself adds another layer. The story describes clay being combined with material connected to a slain divine figure. Human beings therefore emerge from earth and divinity together. You feel the symbolism almost physically. Clay is everywhere in Mesopotamia. Houses are built from it. Tablets are made from it. Vessels are formed from it. Children play beside it. Floodwaters deposit it. The same substance surrounding everyday life becomes the material of humanity. Yet clay alone is insufficient. Something divine enters the mixture. This strange combination creates a creature caught between two conditions. Human beings belong to Earth. Human beings also carry a connection to the divine world. That connection does not make them gods. It makes their role more complicated. They can work. They can suffer. They can reproduce. They can worship. They can maintain temples. They can die. Perhaps most importantly, they can take responsibility for duties once carried by divine labourers. Archaeological records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm the enormous economic importance of temples. These institutions owned land, employed workers, managed livestock, stored grain, and coordinated production. Religion therefore existed alongside administration every day. Offering food to a god was not merely private devotion. It belonged to a wider system connecting agriculture, political authority, temple economy, and divine obligation. A farmer might work because his household needed grain. A temple's worker might labour because the institution demanded it. A king might build because royal ideology required service to the gods. Myth gathers these practical realities into one creation story. Humanity works because the cosmos itself requires work. There is a peculiar fringe interpretation attached to this theme. Some modern writers claim that the labour story preserves a memory of humans being artificially created as a slave species for advanced non-human beings. Popular versions sometimes connect this idea with mining, especially the extraction of gold. The surviving Mesopotamian texts do not provide reliable evidence for that claim. They speak about labour in an agricultural and divine context familiar to ancient Mesopotamia's. Canals appear. Food production matters. Temple service matters. There is no securely translated Sumerian account describing humans engineered specifically to mine gold for extraterrestrial masters. The difference is substantial. Yet the authentic myth raises its own uncomfortable question. If humans were created for a function, what happens when they no longer perform that function properly? This is where purpose becomes more than origin. A created role can imply obligation. If humanity exists to support divine order through labour and offerings, then human society occupies a defined place within the cosmic structure. That place brings benefits. Rain may come, fields may prosper, cities may flourish, temples may receive divine favour. But obligations also create limits. Humans do not stand outside the system. They live inside it. The same may be true of the gods. The open scholarly debate concerns how literally ancient audiences understood these creation narratives. Some historians emphasize their theological meaning, while others highlight their reflection of labour conditions, temple economies, and social hierarchy. There is also discussion about how stories composed for elite scribal circles may have differed from beliefs held by ordinary farmers and labourers. No single text can represent every person living across ancient Mesopotamia. That uncertainty keeps the picture honest. You return to the imagined field. Sunlight has grown stronger now. Mud clings to ankles. A worker lifts another basket of earth from a canal. The movement repeats. Again. Again. The task seems small against the enormous sky. Yet an entire civilization depends upon repetition like this. Perhaps that is why Mesopotamian creation mythology gives labour such cosmic importance. Human beings are not created merely to exist. They are created to maintain, to carry, to build, to cultivate, to feed temples, to preserve the fragile boundary between ordered life and the forces that can undo it. That purpose can sound humble. It can also sound immense. If humanity occupies an assigned position, then human existence becomes part of a contract without ever being described in modern contractual language. The gods receive service. Humans receive a place within civilization. The arrangement is unreal, but it is structured. And structure implies expectations on every side. Perhaps the hidden question is not whether humanity was created by powerful beings. Perhaps the deeper question is what kind of universe requires every being to have a function. Humans have theirs, kings have theirs, priests have theirs. divine powers have theirs. A creature that abandons its function threatens disorder. A god that exceeds its rightful function may threaten something even greater. The afternoon wind moves through the reeds. A worker pauses beside the canal and drinks from a clay cup. For a moment, the entire ancient world feels suspended between obligation and survival. Humanity works because life demands maintenance. The gods receive what humans provide. And somewhere within that exchange lies a quiet possibility. A being may be powerful. A being may be necessary. But necessity does not erase duty. You hear voices gathering inside a place no archaeologist can excavate. The chamber belongs to mythology, yet its political atmosphere would have felt familiar to ancient people. Senior powers assemble, questions are raised, destinies are considered. A decision affecting gods or humans may require more than one divine will. Authority becomes collective. Across Mesopotamian literature, assemblies of gods appear at crucial moments when ordinary divine action is no longer enough. Major decisions can be discussed among powerful figures whose status differs, but whose participation gives the judgment legitimacy. The image resembles a council. You picture a large hall illuminated by oil lamps. Smoke gathers beneath wooden beams. Stone is scarce in southern Mesopotamia, so walls rise mainly from brick, plaster, timber, and carefully arranged space. Human councils met in cities below. Divine councils gathered in imagination above. Ancient Mesopotamian communities possessed assemblies and groups of elders involved in civic and legal affairs. Surviving administrative and legal records demonstrate a sophisticated world of witnesses, judges, officials, contracts, and formal decisions. The mythology seems comfortable with similar structures. One divine figure may speak first. Another may object. Someone proposes punishment. Someone else protects the accused. The decision develops through relationship rather than solitary impulse. A famous example appears in traditions concerning Inanna and her journey into the realm of the dead. There, a group of Anunnaki functions as judges within a domain governed by unusually strict conditions. The setting is important. The underworld is not simply an empty cavern filled with wandering spirits. Mesopotamian imagination gives it gates, officials, rulers, procedures, and boundaries. Even arrival follows rules. Inanna descends through a sequence of gates and loses symbols of status as she travels deeper. Clothing, ornaments, and objects associated with authority are removed according to the customs of that realm. Her identity remains divine. Her privileges do not remain untouched. Eventually the judges confront her. Their judgment carries consequences that status alone cannot prevent. For listeners accustomed to kings and powerful officials, the lesson would have been difficult to miss. Entering another jurisdiction changes what your position allows you to do. Even greatness has context. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania have spent generations studying tablets from ancient Mesopotamian sites where myths involving divine assemblies were copied and preserved. Scholars at Yale University have likewise examined how legal concepts, political institutions, and divine authority overlap within Mesopotamian thought. The surviving literature does not present one standardized heavenly court. Different compositions arrange divine participants differently. Yet councils repeatedly matter. That pattern becomes especially visible when destinies are determined. To determine destiny in Mesopotamian thought can mean much more than predicting what will happen. Divine decisions may establish what should happen, what may happen, and what status a person, city, or god will possess. You feel the difference immediately. Prediction watches the river. A decree redirects it. That kind of authority requires extraordinary legitimacy. In several traditions, the greatest gods gather precisely because certain decisions exceed the ordinary authority of lesser divine figures. This suggests a hierarchy with procedure. The highest powers may dominate discussion, but domination is not identical to acting alone. There is also a wonderfully human quality to these assemblies. Gods can become frightened. They can complain. They can celebrate. They can reconsider. They can support different solutions. Mesopotamian storytellers did not remove personality from divine government. Apparently, eternity did not eliminate meetings. One can imagine a weary scribe finding that detail reassuring. A curious fringe interpretation treats these councils as memories of actual governing committees belonging to advanced visitors. In that modern reconstruction, different gods become officials or commanders deciding human policy from some lost technological headquarters. Archaeology has not demonstrated such an institution. The texts communicate through mythological categories familiar to Mesopotamian religion. Still, the council imagery deserves attention for another reason. It prevents divine authority from becoming entirely personal. If one god could determine every matter without consultation, an assembly would be unnecessary. If divine rank alone settled every disagreement instantly, debate would have little narrative purpose. Instead, stories repeatedly preserve moments where several powers participate in consequential decisions. Perhaps the assembly gives judgment its weight. A single angry deity may represent desire. A council can represent order. This distinction becomes especially important when punishment is involved. When a divine being suffers consequences, the story often makes clear that the outcome belongs to a recognized structure rather than random violence. You can sense something almost constitutional, although that modern word must be used cautiously. There is no known Mesopotamian constitution governing every god. There is no surviving tablet listing universal divine rights and procedures. What exists is more fluid. Custom matters. Rank matters. Oaths matter. Established divine relationships matter. Decisions become authoritative because they emerge from a sacred hierarchy understood by the storytellers. Scholars continue to debating how closely these mythological councils reflect real political institutions. Some see divine assemblies as imaginative projections of human government, especially councils of elders and royal advisors. Others emphasize religious concepts that cannot be reduced simply to political copying. The question remains open because mythology and society continually influence one another. A city teaches people how organized authority works. Religion teaches the city why authority matters. The two mirrors face each other. You stand mentally inside that endless reflection. A king receives judgment from gods. Gods themselves gather to judge. A human court relies upon witnesses. A divine assembly relies upon status, precedent, and sacred authority. The pattern rises through different levels without disappearing. Now consider what this would mean for a powerful divine group. Membership in the Anunnaki could grant enormous prestige. But membership in a council also implies participation in collective structures. A council member possesses authority because the assembly itself has meaning. Walking away from every shared decision would eventually destroy the institution granting that authority. This is the quiet paradox of organized power. The system strengthens its members. The same system limits them. You hear distant voices falling silent as judgment approaches. No thunder arrives. No celestial weapon fires. The atmosphere becomes solemn precisely because everyone present understands that a decision is about to acquire legitimacy. Once declared, it may become difficult to undo. This could explain why divine disagreement in Mesopotamian mythology often proceeds through persuasion, cunning, intercession, or negotiated solutions. The characters do not always behave like beings free to erase every decision they dislike. Sometimes they search for another path. The concept is surprisingly sophisticated of distributed. Raw strength can force an outcome temporarily. Recognized judgment makes an outcome part of order. Perhaps this is why assemblies survive so stubbornly across Mesopotamian stories. They transform divine power into something statual. No god exists entirely alone. Every title carries relationships. Every judgment enters a larger pattern. Every decision can affect other powers whose interests must be considered. The imagined chamber grows quiet. You feel cool flooring beneath your feet while lamps flicker along the walls. The judges remain seated somewhere beyond the smoke. Their greatest power may not be the ability to destroy. It may be the ability to declare what is permitted. And if divine beings themselves must sometimes stand within that judgment, then the deepest authority in the ancient cosmos may belong not to whoever is strongest. It may belong to the decision that everyone, even gods, is expected to recognize. Rain begins as a distant sound against the roof. At first it is almost comforting. Water taps softly against clay and reed, then gathers in narrow channels beside the walls. The air smells cooler, carrying wet earth into a world normally ruled by dust and heat. Then the sound grows heavier. You are standing inside one of Mesopotamia's oldest imagined catastrophes. The flood is remembered in several ancient traditions, including the Sumerian tale of Ziusudra, the Akkadian Atrahasis story, and the later Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh. These accounts are not identical, yet each preserves the terrifying image of civilization overwhelmed by water. For people living between the great rivers, that fear was never abstract. The Tigris and Euphrates sustained agriculture, transport, and urban life, but they could also flood violently. Archaeologists working at several ancient Mesopotamian sites have discovered layers of water-deposited sediment. Although these layers belong to different periods and do not prove one universal flood covering the entire world, that distinction is important. The landscape experienced destructive floods. The stories transform that danger into cosmic memory. You hear water striking doors. Animals become restless. People look toward the canals, wondering whether the banks will hold. In the mythological world, however, the disaster begins long before the first drop falls. It begins with a decision. Humanity has become intolerable to certain gods. In the Atrahasis tradition, human noise disturbs Enlil. Earlier attempts to reduce the population through disease, drought, and famine fail because Ea repeatedly helps humans survive. Eventually, patience disappears. A flood is chosen. The decision is severe enough to require divine agreement. This gives the catastrophe an almost legal character. The question is not simply whether a powerful god can destroy humanity. The question is whether the divine community has authorized destruction. The flood becomes punishment approved through collective authority. You can imagine the gathering. Voices pass through the divine assembly. Arguments are made. A decision settles over the chamber. Certain gods swear to preserve secrecy. Once the oath exists, the coming disaster becomes something more than personal anger. It becomes policy. That is what makes Ea's position so difficult. He opposes the destruction, yet he cannot simply pretend the oath does not exist. His loyalty to humanity collides with his obligation to the divine decision. This conflict gives the story remarkable depth. It is possible for a god to believe that an authorized action is wrong. It is also possible for that god to remain constrained by the structure that authorized it. You sense the tension as the storm approaches. The flood itself is described with overwhelming imagery. Winds rage. Darkness covers the land. Water destroys the familiar boundaries separating field from river and city from marsh. Those boundaries matter because Mesopotamian civilization depends upon controlling water. Canals turn floodplain into farmland. Levers create predictability. Ditches divide fields. The flood reverses everything. Order dissolves. Water becomes ruler. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania and Yale University have examined the literary development of Mesopotamian flood traditions and their relationship to older environmental experiences. The stories survive through different languages and periods, showing how deeply the catastrophe became embedded in regional memory. Yet the divine response to the flood is surprisingly complicated. The gods do not simply watch with satisfaction. Some become frightened by the violence. Some retreat. Some lament what has happened. In certain versions, divine beings grow hungry because humans are no longer providing offerings. That detail is almost painfully ironic. Humanity was judged expendable. Then the divine world discovers that humanity performed necessary functions. The relationship was unequal, but it was reciprocal. A world without humans creates problems even for gods. When the survivor eventually offers sacrifice, the gods gather around the offering with intense eagerness. The image is not flattering. Ancient storytellers allow divine beings to regret, fear, hunger, and depend upon the consequences of their own decisions. This is where the flood becomes more than punishment. It becomes evidence that divine authority can produce a disastrous outcome. A decision may be lawful within the sacred council and still create consequences that participants did not fully anticipate. That possibility feels remarkably modern. Institution can authorize actions. Authority can follow. The outcome can still reveal a terrible mistake. Scholars continue debating how ancient audiences interpreted this tension. Some historians emphasize environmental memory, seeing the flood tradition as a mythological response to destructive river events. Others focus on political and theological meaning, and especially the relationship between population, divine authority, mortality, and human obligation. There is also debate concerning how separate flood traditions influenced one another across centuries of scribal transmission. No single explanation settles every yeto. That uncertainty suits the story. The flood itself destroys certainty. A curious fringe idea claims that these ancient accounts preserve evidence of a technologically advanced civilization deliberately causing a planetary catastrophe. Some versions connect the disaster with celestial events or interventions by non-human beings. No reliable archaeological evidence establishes such a scenario. The surviving texts describe divine decisions through mythological language rather than technical records of engineered destruction. Yet the authentic narrative contains a more unsettling possibility. The gods can choose catastrophe. They can also discover limits to catastrophe. Once humanity nearly disappears, divine society faces a new problem. How can human numbers be controlled without destroying the very system humans maintain? The solution becomes negotiation rather than annihilation. In the Atrahasis tradition, measures are established to limit population through mortality and social conditions. The world is reorganized so that humanity continues, but not without boundaries. This is a crucial development. The Divine Assembly does not simply repeat the flood endlessly. A new arrangement emerges. Punishment creates regulation. Destruction gives way to restriction. The lesson is quiet but significant. Even as gods may be forced to reconsider what their own authority can responsibly accomplish. You hear the rain weakening. Water still covers the imagined land, but the violence begins to pass. Clouds thin gradually above a world stripped of ordinary sound. The silence is enormous. No market opens. No farmer walks toward the fields. No temple courtyard fills with workers. The absence of humanity becomes its own argument. Perhaps this is why the flood story feels less like a simple tale of divine victory and more like a crisis in governance. The beings who approve destruction must confront the consequences of their decree. The survivor is not merely lucky. His existence proves that the original decision was not allowed to stand without modification. A cosmic system that can judge humanity must also judge the results of judgment. That is remarkable. Dear, authority is not only the power to punish. Authority must preserve the order it claims to defend. If punishment destroys that order completely, then punishment defeats its own purpose. The waters slowly retreat in your imagination. Mud replaces roads. Broken reeds cling to branches. The air carries the heavy smell of silt and standing water. Somewhere within that ruined landscape, human life continues because the divine decision was not permitted to become absolute extinction. The flood therefore leaves behind more than devastation. It leaves a principle. Even an authorized catastrophe can encounter a boundary. Even divine anger can require correction. And when the world itself becomes the evidence, the higher demand may be simple. Power must answer to the order it was meant to preserve. The first thing you notice is the smell. Wet timber, river mud, animal breath, and smoke mingle beneath a scarpy washed strangely clean. Water still lies across the lower ground, reflecting pale light where fields and pathways once divided the landscape. One human household remains alive. That survival creates a problem for the gods. The flood was meant to settle a crisis through destruction, yet the existence of a survivor means the divine decision has not reached its absolute conclusion. In different Mesopotamian traditions, this survivor carries different names. The Sumerian account remembers Ziusudra. The Akkadian Atrahasis tradition gives its hero another identity. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh eventually presents the flood survivor as Utnapishtim, a distant man whose impossible longevity becomes central to Gilgamesh's search for escape from death. These figures belong to related traditions rather than one perfectly identical biography. Their shared importance lies in survival. A human remains when humanity was supposed to disappear. You imagine that survivor stepping onto uncertain ground. Mud pulls at his feet. The horizon appears unfamiliar because water has erased the ordinary lines of civilization. Canals, property markers, paths, and cultivated boundaries have vanished beneath silt. He carries no army. He possesses no throne. Yet his continued breathing has altered the divine situation. The gods must now decide what survival means. In the Sumerian flood tradition, Ziusudra eventually receives an extraordinary reward. He is granted life resembling that of the gods and placed in a distant sacred location. That detail is remarkable because ordinary human mortality forms one of the strongest boundaries in Mesopotamian thought. Humans die. Gods endure. The division is fundamental. Yet here, a survivor crosses part of that boundary through divine decision. Researchers connected with the University of Pennsylvania have studied Sumerian literary tablets preserving the damaged account of Ziusudra. Scholars at the University of Oxford have likewise examined how the Sumerian and Akkadian flood traditions developed through centuries of copying and reinterpretation. The historical evidence confirms that several Mesopotamian versions existed. Their differences matter. One tradition emphasizes population and labor. Another preserves fragments concerning kingship and destruction. Another places the flood memory inside a later hero's desperate search for immortality. The survivor changes meaning as the story travels. Yet divine reconsideration remains nearby. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh how he survived the ancient flood through secret warning and careful preparation. When the waters disappear, he offers sacrifice. Then the divine dispute becomes visible. Enlil discovers that a human has survived. He is angry. Someone has escaped the destruction. Ea responds with criticism. Why, he asks in effect, was such an extreme punishment necessary? Would not more measured punishments have been possible? The theological importance of this exchange is easy to overlook. A divine decision is challenged because its scale was excessive. The criticism does not deny that human wrongdoing may require consequences. It questions whether annihilation was justified. That places proportionality inside of the divine argument. You listen to the imagined exchange while smoke rises from the survivor's offering. The scent of roasted food travels upward. The gods gather. The world has become almost empty, and suddenly one surviving family possesses extraordinary importance. The divine community now confronts two realities. Humanity caused disorder. Humanity is also necessary. A permanent solution must somehow acknowledge both. The answer is not another flood. Instead, the survivor becomes part of a changed arrangement. In the Babylonian version, Utnapishtim and his wife receive exceptional life and are removed to a remote place. Humanity continues elsewhere under ordinary mortality. The exception proves the boundary precisely because almost nobody else receives it. Immortality becomes a gift controlled by divine authority rather than a natural human possession. This later becomes painful for Gilgamesh. He wants what Utnapishtim has. He learns that survival from the ancient catastrophe does not create a general right for humans to live forever. One person may be granted an exception. The human condition remains unchanged. That is how institutions often preserve order. They accommodate an extraordinary case without abolishing the rule. A strange fringe theory interprets Utnapishtim's remote residence as evidence that the survivor was physically removed to an advanced non-human settlement. Some versions imagine hidden technology behind his unusual lifespan. No archaeological discovery supports such an interpretation. The story explains his condition through divine favour, not machinery. Still, the geographical distance is intriguing within the mythology itself. The survivor does not simply return to ordinary urban life. He becomes separate. Exceptional survival produces exceptional status. Perhaps this keeps the boundary intact. If everyone could imitate him, mortality would lose its meaning. If only one rescued household receives special treatment, cosmic order can absorb the anomaly. The open scholarly debate concerns how these different flood heroes should be understood in relation to one another. Some specialists emphasize direct literary continuity between earlier Sumerian traditions and later Akkadian versions. Others warn that each composition has distinct theological aims and should not be flattened into a single reconstructed story. The surviving tablets are incomplete enough to prevent perfect certainty. A missing line can conceal an explanation. A damaged passage can turn confidence into probability. You feel that uncertainty in the empty landscape. Nothing here offers a neat doctrine. There is only a survivor standing where destruction should have been complete. His existence forces negotiation. That may be more important than the precise details of his reward. A divine order that permits no correction would need either to destroy him or pretend he does not exist. Instead, the traditions preserve deliberation. Anger appears. Criticism appears. A new condition appears. The result is neither total reversal nor total enforcement. It is compromise. Humanity survives. Mortality remains. One exceptional figure crosses the ordinary boundary. The gods retain authority without repeating annihilation. You watch smoke from the offering thin into the quiet air. Water drips from broken reeds. Birds begin returning to the mudflats, pecking cautiously where currents have deposited seeds and insects. Life resumes slowly. The survivor's greatest significance may not be that he escaped death once. It may be that his survival compelled the divine world to absorb an outcome its original decision had not intended. That suggests something surprisingly restrained within the mythology. Divine decisions can encounter consequences. Those consequences can demand revision. An oath can bind, a judgment can be criticized, an exception can be granted, a new arrangement can replace an unsustainable one. Perhaps this is what a higher order would look like in ancient storytelling. Not an invisible police force standing above the gods, not a mysterious ruler appearing whenever divine behavior becomes inconvenient. Something more subtle governs the scene. Actions produce obligation. Survival creates claims. Consequences cannot simply be wished. The survivor stands beside the receding water, small beneath an enormous sky. He has no weapon capable of threatening a god. He needs none. His existence is enough. The divine plan has encountered reality. Reality has answered, and the plan must change. You hear a human voice speaking carefully before a god. The room is small, dim, and heavy with the smell of oil smoke. A clay tablet rests nearby while witnesses stand close enough to hear every word. Someone is making an oath. To a modern listener, the moment may seem almost ceremonial. In ancient Mesopotamia, however, an oath could carry consequences far beyond personal reputation. Words created obligation. A person swearing falsely did not merely risk embarrassment. The speaker invited divine punishment upon himself if the statement proved untrue. That possibility gave language unusual weight. Legal documents from Mesopotamia preserve countless situations in which witnesses, contracts, judges, property claims, marriages, debts, and disputes depended upon formal statements made before divine authority. Researchers at Yale University and the University of Pennsylvania have studied vast collections of such tablets. The surviving records confirm that oaths formed an important part of legal and political life. People swore by gods. Officials invoked divine names. Kings placed curses upon anyone who violated certain inscriptions or agreements. Treaties could call upon entire groups of gods to witness promises. An oath therefore created more than an agreement between two humans. It placed the agreement inside the sacred order. You imagine a merchant standing before witnesses after a disagreement over silver. Perhaps no written receipt has survived. Perhaps each man tells a different story. The judge cannot travel backward in time. Instead, one party may be required to swear before a deity. That changes the risk. A liar might deceive another merchant. Deceiving a god is another matter. The system depends upon belief that divine powers observe what human courts cannot. The same principle appears in royal diplomacy. Rulers could swear agreements in the presence of gods whose names functioned as witnesses and guarantors. Breaking the agreement might then expose the violator to curses involving illness, defeat, famine, loss of descendants, or political destruction. The language could be severe, yet its purpose was stability. An oath attempted to make tomorrow predictable. That is important in a world where armies move, dynasties change, and distant rulers cannot constantly supervise one another. A promise becomes stronger when sacred consequences stand behind it. Now carry that logic into mythology. If humans imagine their most serious promises as witnessed by gods, what happens when gods themselves swear? The answer is revealing. Divine oaths appear as genuine constraints. A god may dislike the consequences of an agreement, yet still search for a way to act without openly violating it. This suggests that the oath is not decorative language. Within the story, it changes what action remains legitimate. You can feel the difference between inability and prohibition. A god may possess enough power to perform an action. The oath makes that action forbidden. Nothing physical prevents it. The restraint comes from recognized obligation. This may be one of the closest ancient Mesopotamian mythology comes to expressing something resembling higher laws. Not law written by an earthly king, not law enforced by soldiers, a binding order created through sacred speech. Once spoken properly, the words acquire force. That idea fits the wider Mesopotamian fascination with effective language. Blessings matter. Curses matter. Royal decrees matter. Ritual formulas matter. Names themselves carry significance. Speech can alter relationships because authorized speech belongs to the structure of power. A curious practice from ancient Mesopotamian law makes this especially vivid. In some difficult cases, a person might face an ordeal involving a river. The river was not treated merely as water. It could function as a divine judge, or the accused might enter the water under prescribed conditions, with survival or failure interpreted within a sacred legal framework. To modern eyes, this appears frighteningly uncertain. To participants, the ordeal transferred judgment beyond ordinary human knowledge. The river knew what the court could not. That small legal detail reveals how deeply divine judgment entered practical life. Water could witness truth. A god could guarantee a contract. An oath could bind political behavior. Reality itself seemed poorly structured. Fringe interpretations sometimes turn these ideas into speculation about ancient control systems. Some writers imagine divine oaths as regulations imposed upon advanced beings by a superior civilization or governing authority. There is no reliable archaeological evidence for such a technological hierarchy. The tablets speak in the language of religion, kingship, ritual, and sacred obligation. Yet the speculative question survives in a different form. What if the gods themselves were understood as unable to act legitimately once a binding decision had been sworn? That possibility does not require subjects. It arises directly from the logic of oath culture. A promise before divine witnesses cannot simply mean whatever the speaker wants tomorrow. Otherwise, the institution collapses. The same would apply even more strongly to a divine assembly. If powerful gods swear collectively to a decision, then later disagreement creates a problem. The decision may be regretted. Its consequences may become unbearable. Still, the oath remains. The only available path may involve interpretation, exception, release, or another decision recognized by equal authority. This resembles legal reasoning more than warfare, and that distinction quietly transforms the mystery. Perhaps a boundary between divine beings and humanity would not require guards. Perhaps it would require consent. A divine group might possess the capacity to approach a forbidden place while lacking the lawful authority to do so. The problem would not be distance. It would be legitimacy. Scholars continue debating how literally Mesopotamian audiences understood divine speech as binding cosmic reality. Some researchers emphasize literary symbolism, viewing divine oaths as reflections of human legal institutions projected into mythology. Others argue that ancient ritual practice gave spoken formulas a deeper sacred effectiveness that modern distinctions between symbol and reality fail to capture. There is no simple answer. Ancient people did not necessarily separate religion, law, and cosmic structure the way modern societies often do. For them, the categories overlapped. A contract could invoke a god. A king could legislate under divine authority. A curse could protect an inscription. A ritual statement could restore proper relationships. Words performed work. You stand beside a darkened temple doorway as evening settles across the city. A cool iron latch rests beneath your palm. Farther inside, a lamp flame trembles. The silence feels formal rather than empty. Somewhere in this world, a promise has been spoken. Nothing visible has changed. No wall has risen. No chain has appeared. Yet everyone involved understands that the situation is different now. The speaker has crossed from intention into obligation. That transformation may offer the strongest clue to how a higher law could restrain beings of immense power. Strength is useful against stone. Weapons are useful against bodies. Neither matters much against an oath if the entire structure of authority depends upon honouring it. A god who breaks every binding word would weaken the sacred order supporting divine legitimacy itself. The consequence might not be immediate destruction. It could be something more profound. Loss of standing, loss of recognised authority, exclusion from assembly, removal from a sacred place, perhaps even separation from a world once governed through agreement. The night deepens beyond the walls. The oath remains invisible. That is precisely why it feels powerful. It needs no monument. It exists because those who matter accept that it binds them. And if gods could accept such bonds, then even divine return might depend upon something quieter than power. It might depend upon permission. You stand before an empty pedestal. Incense still darkens the ceiling above it. Priests move quietly through the sanctuary, but the central image is gone. Where polished wood, precious metal, and sacred clothing once proclaimed divine presence, there is now only absence. For an ancient city, this could feel catastrophic. A god might possess cosmic authority, yet divine presence was often expressed through a particular temple and cult image. When enemies captured that image, people could experience the event as something far greater than stolen property. The deity had departed. Sometimes the departure was understood as punishment. Sometimes foreign armies carried the image away. Sometimes literature described a god abandoning a city whose political or moral order had collapsed. Divine absence therefore became imaginable. That fact opens an unusual possibility. If gods could leave, could they also be prevented from returning? Ancient Mesopotamian history offers a powerful example involving Babylon and its principal god, Marduk. During periods of conquest, enemy rulers removed sacred statues from conquered cities as trophies and political symbols. In the 12th century before Common Era, Elamite forces carried Marduk's cult statue away from Babylon. The loss mattered enormously. Researchers at institutions including Yale University and the University of Chicago have studied texts showing how Mesopotamian political theology treated divine images as active centers of sacred presence rather than decorative representations. When the statue vanished, ritual life changed. The city's relationship with its god had been disrupted. Eventually, a Babylonian ruler celebrated the restoration of Marduk's statue as an event of extraordinary religious importance. Return required restoration. That pattern is worth noticing. The god was not imagined as physically powerless merely because an enemy moved a statue, yet ritual presence, political legitimacy, and sacred geography had been broken. Something had to be repaired. You can almost hear the city during such an absence. Temple doors open at dawn. Offerings are préparés. Priests recite familiar words. But the sacred centre feels incomplete. The god belongs to Babylon, yet Babylon lacks the visible form through which divine presence is properly maintained. This does not mean ancient people believed a statue contained the entire god like water inside a jar. Mesopotamian theology surrounding divine images was more complicated. Through ritual, an image could become a suitable, if earthly manifestation of divine presence. Sacred identity and material form were joined without becoming simply identical. That distinction creates room for displacement. A deity may continue to exist while access to the deity changes. Presence can be interrupted. Return can require conditions. The idea becomes even more dramatic within mythology concerning stolen divine authority. One ancient Akkadian story tells of Anzu, a powerful creature associated with the Doreen world, who steals the Tablet of Destinies. The object represents legitimate command over cosmic order. Anzu takes it from Enlil and escapes. Suddenly, authority itself has been seized. The crisis is not merely theft. The thief now possesses something he was never entitled to hold. Divine powers hesitate. Someone must restore the proper arrangement. Eventually, the warrior god Ninurta confronts Anzu and recovers the Tablet of Destinies. The story contains a remarkable distinction between possession and legitimacy. Anzu can seize the object. He can use its power. But possession does not make his claim rightful. The cosmic community treats his action as violation. You might imagine a person stealing a royal seal. The seal remains genuine. Commands bearing it may appear authoritative. Yet the thief does not become the rightful king merely because the object sits in his hand. Ancient mythology magnifies this principle until it reaches the structure of existence. Power can be stolen. Authority still remembers its proper owner. That distinction becomes central when considering divine exiles. A being excluded from an accepted order might retain abilities. It might retain knowledge. It might even retain immense strength. What it loses is standing. The gates of legitimate participation could close. This does not require a prison. It requires recognition. A divine assembly can refuse membership. A sacred city can lose a god's accepted presence. A stolen power can be recovered and restored. An unauthorized holder can become an enemy of order. The open scholarly debate concerns how literally ancient audiences imagined such sacred displacement. Some historians interpret divine departures primarily as theological explanations for military defeat, political collapse, or temple destruction. Others emphasize ritual reality, arguing that the absence of cult images genuinely transformed how communities experienced divine presence. The surviving evidence suggests both dimensions often work together. Politics spoke through religion. Religion gave political catastrophe cosmic meaning. A city conquered by enemies did not simply lose walls. It could feel abandoned by heaven. A quirky strand of modern speculation takes divine absence much further. Some fringe writers propose that Mesopotamian myths preserve memories of non-human beings expelled from Earth after violating agreements with superior powers. In that reconstruction, ancient references to divine departure become records of literal banishment from the planet. No accepted archaeological evidence demonstrates such an event. The tablets do not describe an extraterrestrial court sentencing the Anunnaki to remain beyond Earth. Still, the mythology contains enough genuine themes of exclusion, lost authority, displaced presence, and forbidden possession to make a softer question reasonable. Could an ancient storyteller imagine a god who was unable to return because return was no longer legitimate? The answer appears to be yes in principle. Not necessarily for the Anunnaki as a specific group, not necessarily as a permanent cosmic sentence, but exclusion itself fits comfortably within Mesopotamian religious imagination. A deity may lose a city, a divine image may remain in foreign hands, a sacred privilege may be withdrawn, a stolen authority may be reclaimed, a transgressor may become separated from the community whose order has been violated. You feel cold stone beneath your fingertips as the empty sanctuary grows darker. Outside, evening merchants close wooden shutters. Families prepare food. A priest trims a lamp whose flame suddenly becomes small. The missing divine image transforms ordinary silence into something heavier. Presence is not guaranteed. That may be the unsettling lesson. Modern people often imagine gods as beings who can appear anywhere simply because they possess supernatural power. Ancient Mesopotamian religion often tied divine presence to relationship. A city maintained a temple. Priests performed rituals. Kings restored sanctuaries. Offering sustained sacred bonds. Divine presence existed within a network of obligations. Return could therefore be more than movement through space. It could mean restoration of relationship. That changes the central question completely. completely. If a being might be capable of approaching a place and still remain outside its recognized order, it might stand at the boundary with all its former power intact. Yet if authority depends upon rightful position, raw strength cannot fully restore what has been lost. Recognition must return. Permission must return. The relationship must become valid again. You look once more at the empty pedestal. Nothing blocks the doorway. No guards stand outside. No chains hang from the walls. Yet the absence feels absolute. Perhaps exile in such a world is not defined by distance. Perhaps exile begins when the sacred order no longer recognizes your right to be present. And if that principle could apply even to divine beings, then the most powerful barrier imaginable might remain completely invisible. You walk through a temple at dawn and notice how much effort is required to preserve presence. A servant sweeps dust from the courtyard. Another carries water toward a basin. Bread is arranged for an offering while oil lamps throw trembling light against painted walls. Nothing is casual. The god may be unseen, but the household of the god remains busy. Across Mesopotamian history, temples developed elaborate routines intended to maintain relationships between cities and their divine patrons. Sacred images were washed, clothed, adorned, fed, praised, and carried during festivals according to established ritual calendars. The daily work could resemble service within a royal palace. Food arrived. Garments were prepared. Musicians performed. Priests attended carefully to ceremony. The divine resident was treated as a great ruler whose presence required constant care. Yet something curious happens within this system. The more elaborate the ritual becomes, the more distant the deity can seem. You rarely imagine an ordinary citizen casually entering the innermost sanctuary and speaking directly with a god. Access is controlled. Priests mediate. Diviners interpret signs. Kings claim divine favor through formal ceremonies. Sacred presence remains powerful but increasingly structured through institutions. You stand near a doorway beyond which only selected temple personnel may pass. Cool shadow touches your face. The smell of sesame oil mixes with incense and fresh bread. Somewhere farther inside stands an image dressed in costly fabric and jewelry. To believers, this is not simply decoration. The image occupies a sacred relationship created through ritual. Research conducted through major collections at the University of Chicago and the University of Pennsylvania has shown how carefully temple archives recorded offerings, personnel, property, and ritual obligations. These records confirm something easily missed when ancient religion is reduced to mythology. Divine presence required administration. A god might command storms in poetry, yet the earthly sanctuary still needed flour delivered on time. The contrast is almost tender. Cosmic majesty depends upon someone remembering the bread. Ancient communities invested enormous resources in maintaining these sacred households because the relationship between god and city was considered fundamental to prosperity. When the temple functioned properly, order appeared intact. When rituals failed, anxiety followed. When enemies damaged sanctuaries, political defeat could feel like cosmic abandonment. This atmosphere became especially visible during periods when Mesopotamian literature reflected upon ruined cities. Laments describe divine patrons leaving their temples as destruction approaches. The city loses not only walls and inhabitants, but sacred protection. Wind blows through abandoned streets. Animals wander through spaces once filled with ceremony. The god is absent. The silence becomes theological. Such poetry does not necessarily claim that the deity has ceased to exist. Instead, presence is withdrawn. That difference matters. An absent god remains powerful precisely because absence itself explains catastrophe. People ask why protection failed. The answer can become painful. Perhaps the city offended divine expectations. Perhaps destiny had turned against the dynasty. Perhaps a greater assembly had decreed that destruction must occur. The population experiences defeat as something permitted at a level beyond human politics. This creates a strange emotional world. People continue worshipping beings who may sometimes refuse to remain near them. Divine distance becomes part of faith. By the first millennium before Common Era, Mesopotamian scholars maintained increasingly sophisticated traditions of divination designed to interpret signs believed to reveal divine intentions. They studied celestial events. They examined unusual births. They interpreted dreams. They inspected the organs of sacrificed animals. These practices assumed that the gods communicated, but often indirectly. Heaven did not need to speak in an ordinary human voice. A pattern in the sky could carry meaning. A strange event could become a warning. The world itself functioned like a surface upon which divine intention left traces. You imagine a scholar standing beneath a clear Babylonian night. He watches the moon carefully. He records its appearance on clay. Nearby, another scholar compares observations with older omen collections. Their work is patient and systematic. They are listening to distant gods through patterns. This is a different kind of sacred presence. The deity is not necessarily standing beside the observer. The deity is inferred. Scholars continue debating how ordinary Mesopotamians understood this growing reliance upon divination. Some historians see it as evidence of increasing intellectual systematization within temple and court scholarship. Others caution that indirect communication does not necessarily mean people believe the gods had become more remote. Ritual presence, dreams, prayer, doors, and prophecy, and omens could coexist without contradiction. The ancient religious experience was flexible enough to contain several forms of divine contact. Still, the distance is emotionally striking. A god may rule a city while communicating through specialists. A god may receive meals without visibly consuming them. A god may protect a king while remaining accessible mainly through ritual signs. Presence becomes mediated. A curious fringe interpretation claims this gradual distance preserves memory of physical visitors who once interacted openly with humanity and then withdrew. Some writers imagine that temples became ceremonial reminders of beings who had literally departed from Earth. No archaeological evidence demonstrates such a transition from extraterrestrial presence to ritual memory. Temple traditions developed within recognizable Mesopotamian religious and political systems. Yet the emotional pattern remains interesting without that claim. Human beings preserve relationships with powers they cannot see. That pattern appears again and again. A priest repeats an old hymn. A king restores a sanctuary. A family leaves an offering. A diviner studies the liver of a sheep. Each action assumes that distance does not mean irrelevance. The god may be remote. The obligation remains close. Perhaps this is how divine absence becomes sustainable. A civilization does not require constant visible appearance if institutions preserve the relationship. Temple walls remember. Ritual calendars remember. Priests remember. Songs remember. Kingship remembers. Even ruins remember. You place your hand against a mud brick wall warmed by afternoon light. The building is temporary by geological standards. Rain will eventually damage it. War may destroy it. A new ruler may rebuild it. Yet the ritual idea can survive every reconstruction. Presence becomes less dependent upon direct encounter and more dependent upon continuity. That shift creates a quiet possibility. If divine beings were expected to remain distant under certain conditions, humanity could continue without assuming they had vanished entirely. The gods might still possess authority. They might still receive worship. They might still influence destiny. Yet direct appearance would no longer be necessary. Distance itself could become a part of the arrangement. This is far subtler than imprisonment. A forbidden being must be restrained. A distant sacred power only needs boundaries governing how presence is expressed. Perhaps through dreams. Perhaps through omens. Perhaps through ritual. Perhaps through institutions maintained across generations. You hear a temple door close as night approaches. The wooden beam settles into place with a deep, final sound. Outside, stars begin appearing above the flat horizon. Inside, offerings remain beneath fading lamplight. No god steps visibly into the courtyard. No divine voice breaks the silence. Still, everyone behaves as though the relationship continues. That may be the most unsettling form of absence. Not disappearance, not death. Distance with obligation intact. A presence remembered so carefully that it does not need to return visibly in order to remain powerful. You hear drums somewhere beyond the temple wall. Their rhythm is slow and measured. Sandals scrape against packed earth while torchlight trembles across faces gathered beside a processional road. A god is returning. At least, that is how the city understands the moment. No figure descends from the stars. No mysterious craft appears above the rooftops. Instead, priests carry a sacred image through streets decorated for ceremony. The divine presence moves with them. To ancient Mesopotamians, arrival could mean many things. A deity might enter a temple. A sacred image might return from another city. A festival could renew divine presence. A king might restore a sanctuary and declare that the god had come home. Return did not always describe movement across ordinary physical distance. Sometimes it did describe restored relationship. This distinction becomes essential when ancient texts speak about gods leaving or entering cities. Modern readers often picture supernatural beings traveling through space like human visitors. Ancient worshippers could experience the same language differently. A god might remain cosmically powerful while becoming ritually absent from one particular place. When the sacred relationship was repaired, the god could be said to return. You watch the procession pass. Musicians walk beside priests. Incense smoke bends beneath the night air. People gather at doorways while the divine image approaches the temple gate. The ceremony does not merely celebrate movement. It restores order. Mesopotamian festivals frequently involved processions in which divine images travelled between sacred locations. These journeys connected temples, cities, kings, agricultural cycles, and divine authority. Historical records confirm that major cities maintained complex festival calendars. At Babylon, the Great New Year festival eventually became one of the most important examples of ritual renewal in the region. Its ceremonies connected Marduk, kingship, the city, and the restoration of cosmic stability. Researchers at the University of Chicago and the University of Oxford have studied ritual texts describing how such festivals reinforced political and religious order. The details changed across centuries. The underlying principle remained powerful. The divine world could be made present through ritual movement. A god leaving one sanctuary did not necessarily mean permanent disappearance. Likewise, a god returning did not necessarily mean physical arrival from some remote celestial location. Presence had several layers. You can almost feel those layers while standing beside the processional road. The statue is visible. The deity is invisible. The crowd experiences both together. This was not impotheistic. The ritual image could become a genuine focus of divine presence through carefully performed ceremonies. Ancient priests treated the distinction between an ordinary crafted object and a consecrated divine image with great seriousness. Ritual transformed status. Wood and metal became something sacred. The object remained material. Its meaning became greater than its material. This helps explain why conquering armies sometimes removed divine images from defeated cities. Taking the statue could symbolize more than stealing treasure. It could proclaim that the defeated city's divine protection had failed. Returning the image could then become an act of restoration. A king who recovered a captured god might present himself as the ruler who repaired cosmic and political order. The deity had come home. Yet the journey involved armies, diplomacy, ceremony, memory, and theology all at once. Return therefore carried political meaning. A ruler restoring a displaced god could strengthen his own legitimacy. A rebuilt temple could announce that divine favour had returned to a devastated city. A festival could tell the population that disorder had ended. Sacred arrival could function almost like the reopening of reality. That may sound grand for a procession of priests carrying an image. Ancient cities specialized in making administration feel cosmic. One can sympathize. Even their modern institutions occasionally discover that a ribbon and several important hats can transform construction into destiny. Yet behind the gentle humour lies a serious point. Ceremony tells people what an event means. Without ceremony, a statue moves. With ceremony, a god returns. The difference belongs to shared belief. A curious fringe interpretation treats descriptions of divine arrival as memories of literal landings by advanced beings. Terms involving heaven, divine journeys, shining objects, and sacred vehicles are sometimes gathered together as supposed evidence of forgotten technology. No accepted Mesopotamian translation requires that conclusion. Religious poetry regularly uses elevated imagery because gods are gods, not because scribes are quietly describing machinery. Still, the ancient texts do leave room for movement. Gods travel, they enter cities, they depart sanctuaries, they journey between divine realms. The scholarly question concerns what kinds of reality ancient audiences attribute to these narratives. Some historians emphasize ritual performance and symbolic theology. Others caution against assuming that ancient worshippers regarded myth as merely symbolic in the modern sense. For them, ritual presence and divine reality may not have been separate categories. A procession could be symbolic and real simultaneously. That possibility is difficult for modern minds trained to choose one explanation. Either the god physically arrives, we think, or nothing happens. Mesopotamian religion offers a more layered alternative. Presence can intensify. Presence can withdraw. Presence can become localized. Presence can be restored through the correct sacred conditions. This makes the word return far more complicated. Imagine a temple that has stood abandoned after war. Its roof has collapsed. Offerings have stopped. Wind carries sand into the inner sanctuary. Years later, a new ruler repairs the walls. Priests return. The cult image is restored. Offerings resume. Songs fill the courtyard. Did the god return? Politically, yes. Ritually, yes. Emotionally, certainly. Whether anyone imagined a literal journey through the sky becomes almost secondary. Return means that the relationship works again. That interpretation has enormous consequences for the mystery surrounding divine absence. If ancient gods could be present through cult, ritual, kingship, and sacred geography, then their return would not require visible bodies walking into human cities. It might require recognition. A temple must be ready. A priesthood must function. A ruler must possess legitimacy. A festival must occur properly. The community must accept that the divine relationship has been renewed. Without those conditions, physical proximity alone might mean very little. A stranger entering a temple is not automatically its god. Power does not create sacred legitimacy by itself. The thought becomes quieter as the procession reaches the gate. Priests stop briefly. Music softens. The doors open. The image passes into darkness illuminated by lamps. People outside cannot follow. They remain beneath the stars. Something has changed. although nothing spectacular appears in the sky. The god is home. Perhaps this is the most useful way to think about return in the ancient Mesopotamian world. Not simply as arrival, as restoration. A god returns when the correct relationship becomes possible again. A city returns when its temples function. A king returns order when legitimacy is recognized. A festival returns the cosmos to its proper rhythm. Return can therefore describe a condition rather than a journey. That possibility makes any supposed future return of the Anunnaki far less straightforward than modern stories suggest. The ancient question would not necessarily be, can they reach humanity? It might be, under what conditions could their presence become rightful again? Distance is easy to imagine. Permission is alienadas. The drums fade inside the temple complex. Outside, people begin walking home beneath a clear sky. No one has seen a god descend through the heavens, yet the city behaves as though sacred presence has been renewed. Perhaps return in such a world begins not when a being crosses space. Perhaps it begins when an ancient relationship becomes valid once more. The room changes. Clay tablets remain on the table, but electric light now shines above them. The air smells of paper, dust, and old bindings rather than incense or river mud. The ancient gods have entered the 20th century, and something unexpected happens to them. They become extraterrestrial. The transformation does not occur because archaeologists uncover a hidden spacecraft beneath a temple. It does not begin with a newly translated tablet describing engines, planets, or machines. It begins through interpretation. During the 19th century, scholars gradually deciphered cuneiform writing and recovered the literature of ancient Mesopotamia from thousands of tablets. That achievement transformed knowledge of human history. Entire civilizations returned to view. Sumerian language became readable. Babylonian myths could be compared with later religious traditions. Kings once known only through scattered references acquired inscriptions, palaces, administrative archives, and personal names. The discovery was extraordinary enough without adding visitors from another planet. Yet ancient Mesopotamian literature contained exactly the ingredients that modern imagination finds irresistible. Gods descended from heaven. Humanity was created. Divine beings gathered in councils. Enormous floods destroyed us all. Destroyed Selksurum. Kings received authority from supernatural powers. Some ancient rulers were credited with astonishingly long reigns. To a reader approaching these traditions without their cultural setting, the stories could resemble distorted reports of technological events. A new interpretation slowly formed. The most influential modern figure associated with the extraterrestrial Anunnaki idea was Zecharia Sitchin, an author whose books became widely popular beginning during the 1970s. He argued that ancient Mesopotamian texts preserved knowledge of advanced beings connected with another planet. According to his interpretation, these visitors came to Earth in the distant past and influenced human development. He identified them with the Anunnaki. The story expanded dramatically. Human origins became genetic engineering. Divine conflicts became political struggles between extraterrestrial factions. Ancient astronomy became evidence of advanced scientific knowledge. Mythological journeys became space travel. Cool. The Anunnaki were no longer a changing group of Mesopotamian deities. They became characters in a technological history tour. You can understand why the idea spread. It offers an elegant answer to many mysteries at once. Why did civilization emerge? Visitors taught humanity. Why did ancient people describe gods descending from heaven? They witnessed spacecraft. Why do creation stories speak of humans serving divine beings? Humans were designed as workers. Why do flood traditions appear in ancient literature? Advanced beings knew catastrophe was approaching. Each uncertain fragment suddenly fits a single enormous story. It is satisfying, perhaps too satisfying. Professional Assyriologists and Sumerologists do not accept Sitchin's translations as reliable representations of the ancient languages. Scholars trained in cuneiform have repeatedly pointed out that the extraterrestrial interpretation depends upon meanings that are not supported by standard Sumerian and Akkadian vocabulary. The disagreement is not merely philosophical, it concerns translation. Ancient words have grammatical structures, parallel examples, dictionary histories, and thousands of surviving contexts. A proposed meaning must survive comparison with those contexts. This is where the extraterrestrial interpretation encounters serious problems. The Anunnaki are not described in established translations as inhabitants of a hidden planet travelling periodically toward Earth. Their name belongs to Mesopotamian divine genealogy and collective terminology. Nor do surviving creation accounts describe laboratories filled with recognizable genetic equipment. Humanity is fashioned through mythological materials such as clay and divine substance. That language belongs comfortably within ancient creation mythology. Turning it into biotechnology requires adding concepts the texts themselves do not explicitly contain. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, Yale University, and the University of Chicago have contributed to the modern study of Mesopotamian languages through enormous collections of tablets, dictionaries, publications, and archaeological records. Their work makes one fact especially clear. The ancient textual world is complicated. There is no single Sumerian book explaining the Anunnaki from beginning to end. There are fragments, different periods, different cities, different languages, different theological traditions. That complexity is inconvenient for modern grand theories. A grand theory prefers one hidden explanation. History usually offers 20 smaller explanations arguing quietly in a library. There is something almost charming about that contrast. The extraterrestrial Anunnaki became culturally powerful partly because the modern story is easier to remember than the ancient one is. A small group of advanced visitors is simple. A divine category changing across centuries of Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian tradition requires patience. Modern media rewards simplicity. Ancient religion demands patience. A quirky detail illustrates how far the transformation travelled. Popular culture eventually gave the Anunnaki associations with secret governments, hidden bloodlines, forbidden archaeology, planetary catastrophes, and predictions of future return. Ideas from entirely different traditions became attached to the same name. One ancient term became a container for modern anxiety. That may tell you more about recent history than ancient Mesopotamia. Every age gives old gods new clothing. Victorian scholars often compared ancient religions through biblical questions. 20th century readers increasingly imagined lost technologies, space travel, nuclear destruction, and advanced civilizations. The myths remained ancient. The fears surrounding them became modern. Scholars continue debating why ancient astronaut theories remain attractive despite rejection from specialists. Some researchers emphasize distrust of institutions. Others point toward the psychological appeal of hidden knowledge. Some note that technological societies naturally reinterpret religious imagery through technological categories. A fiery divine vehicle becomes a machine because machines define modern power. A god descending from heaven becomes a visitor from space because space has replaced the upper sky as the location of mystery. The transformation feels almost inevitable. You sit beneath the electric lamp while photographs of tablets lie across the desk. Their wedge-shaped signs remain stubbornly ancient. They do not become easier simply because a dramatic theory has been placed around them. This is where a quieter mystery returns. Removing extraterrestrial claims does not make the Anunnaki uninteresting. It makes them harder to understand. They belong to a religious world where divine authority could be divided, negotiated, localized, inherited, and constrained. That world does not require technology to become strange. Its strangeness is philosophical. The gods were powerful without necessarily being absolute. Human beings lived inside obligations they did not create. Cities depended upon sacred legitimacy. Divine presence could be lost. Authority could become disputed. Cosmic order could stand above individual desire. The modern extraterrestrial story transforms these ideas into physical events because physical events are easier to visualize. A spacecraft can arrive. A planet can approach. A biological experiment can be imagined inside a laboratory. But what does it mean for a divine being to lose legitimate authority? What would it mean for sacred presence to depend upon permissions? Those questions are harder. They cannot be drawn as easily. They cannot be photographed. Perhaps that is why they remain hidden beneath the louder modern mythology. The Anunnaki of popular culture may promise a spectacular return. The Anunnaki of the ancient texts offer no such timetable. They remain inside poetry, ritual, divine genealogy, judgment, and sacred order. You look again at the clay signs beneath the lamp. Modern imagination has carried them to distant planets. The tablets remain where they began. In Mesopotamia, among cities that feared floodwater, honoured divine assemblies, maintained temples, and believed power itself belonged inside an ordered cosmos. Perhaps the greatest distortion was never turning gods into visitors. Perhaps it was turning complicated ancient ideas into something simple. You sit beneath a quiet museum light and stare at half a sentence. The clay fragment is smaller than your hand. Its edges are broken. Several wedge-shaped signs remain clear, while the rest disappear into a jagged absence where the tablet snapped thousands of years ago. This is how certainty often ends. Not with a dramatic contradiction. With missing clay, ancient Mesopotamian literature survives through an extraordinary accident of material history. Clay tablets could endure fires, collapsing buildings, invading armies, and centuries underground far better than papyrus or wooden writing boards. Yet survival rarely means perfection. Tablets crack. Corners disappear. Surface signs erode. Salt damages clay. Excavators recover fragments separated from the pieces that once completed them. A poem may survive in several copies, each preserving different lines. Another composition may exist only through one damaged tablet. The ancient world reaches you through interruption. You lean closer. A scholar examining such a fragment does not simply translate each visible sign and move onward. Every sign must be identified according to its shape, grammatical position, surrounding vocabulary, and comparison with other texts. A single wedge can matter. The angle of an impression may distinguish one sign from another. A damaged verb ending can change who performs an action. A missing divine name can alter an entire scene. This makes cuneiform translation less like decoding a secret message and more like rebuilding a shattered mosaic when half the stones are gone. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, Yale University, and the University of Oxford have spent generations publishing, comparing, and revising Mesopotamian texts. Their work confirms a simple historical fact. Translations change because scholarship improves. A reading accepted decades ago may be revised when another manuscript appears. A tablet in one museum may unexpectedly join a fragment stored thousands of miles away. A newly recognized parallel text can restore missing words. The ancient sentence slowly changes shape. Imagine two fragments resting in separate collections for a century. One preserves the beginning of a hymn. Another preserves several mysterious lines without an obvious introduction. Then someone notices that their broken edges, handwriting, vocabulary, and sequence belong together. Suddenly, the silence between them disappears. The text becomes longer. The meaning becomes clearer. This kind of discovery is far less dramatic than finding a golden tomb. Yet for historians, these can be more important. One joined fragment can overturn a confident interpretation. That possibility should remain in your mind whenever someone claims that a single ancient line proves an enormous hidden history. The smaller the surviving fragment, the greater the temptation to make it carry too much weight. There is another complication. Ancient scribes copied texts. They also changed the Sumerian. A composition transmitted across centuries might acquire different spellings, altered lines, local divine names, expanded passages, shortened passages, or theological adjustments. The surviving copy may therefore be much younger than the story it preserves. You are not always reading an original composition. You may be reading a copy of a copy of a copy. That chain can extend across generation. A student scribe may make a mistake. A teacher may correct one. Another copyist may deliberately improve the wording. A later scholar may preserve an older phrase he barely understands. Textual tradition becomes a river whose water never remains perfectly still. This creates one of the great scholarly debates in Mesopotamian studies. Researchers continue discussing how confidently later copies can be used to reconstruct much older religious beliefs. Some specialists emphasize the continuity of scribal tradition across centuries. Others stress that every surviving manuscript belongs to its own historical setting and may reflect later theological concerns. Both cautions matter. An old story can survive. An old story can also change. You feel rough clay beneath your fingertips in imagination. A line ends abruptly. Modern editions often mark such damage openly. Editors indicate broken signs, uncertain readings, restored words, and places where nothing can be recovered. Those marks may look technical, but they represent intellectual honesty. The translator is telling you where knowledge stops. That boundary is precious. It protects history from becoming wish fulfillment. Fringe interpretation often begins precisely where the tablet becomes quiet. A missing passage becomes a hidden confession. An uncertain sign becomes a star. A poetic word becomes a machine. A damaged divine title becomes evidence of a forgotten ruler. The absence does most of the work. A particularly quirky habit within modern Anunnaki speculation is the tendency to present reconstructed passages as though every word appeared clearly on one complete tablet. In reality, some famous Mesopotamian compositions survive through multiple broken witnesses requiring careful editorial reconstruction. The clean paragraph seen in translation can hide years of scholarly effort beneath it. That does not make the so translabien vis. It makes the process human. You picture a table covered with photographs, hand copies, dictionaries, grammatical notes, and competing readings. One scholar proposes a restoration, another rejects it. A third finds a parallel phrase in an unrelated hymn. Years pass. The interpretation becomes more precise. Perhaps the missing noun referred to a temple. Perhaps the supposed celestial object was actually a standard poetic expression. Perhaps a divine name was copied incorrectly in one manuscript. This slow correction is the puzzle of revelation. It is accumulation, and it is usually how reliable knowledge grows. The uncertainty surrounding the Anunnaki becomes particularly important because the term appears across different periods and genres. A divine group named in one ritual text cannot automatically be assumed to have exactly the same membership or function in another composition centuries away. Context matters. Language matters. Date matters. Place matters. Even scribal purpose matters. A school exercise may preserve an old literary phrase without telling you how ordinary people understood it. A royal inscription may exaggerate divine approval because royal inscriptions are not famous for modesty. A hymn may use cosmic imagery because poetry does that sort of thing. None of this removes mystery. It changes its shape. The mystery becomes less about secret information deliberately concealed by ancient scribes. It becomes about how much information time has erased. That is somehow more haunting. You are not facing a locked archive guarded by priests. You are facing a library shattered by history. Wind-scattered parts of it. War-buried parts of it. Collectors-separated parts of it. Entire shelves may have returned to mud. The silence was not planned. It happened. Yet humans dislike accidental silence. We prefer intention. A missing line feels more meaningful when someone supposedly removed it. A broken tablet feels more exciting when the missing portion supposedly contained forbidden knowledge. Chance feels unsatisfying. Conspiracy gives the fracture a purpose. But archaeology teaches a colder lesson. History loses things constantly. You allow your eyes to rest upon the broken edge again. Beyond that edge, perhaps 10 signs once continued. Perhaps 50. Maybe another tablet somewhere preserves them. Maybe nothing does. No responsible scholar can fill that space simply because a theory needs an answer. This is where the question of a higher law becomes most delicate. Ancient Mesopotamian texts certainly contain divine counsels, decrees, oaths, destinies, punishments, and restricted sacred roles. Whether those ideas formed one universal law governing every divine being cannot be demonstrated from the surviving evidence. The possibility can be explored. It cannot honestly be declared proven. That distinction protects the mystery rather than weakening it. Certainty would close the door. Evidence leaves it partly open. You sit quietly while the museum light reflects from the clay. The surviving signs tell you something. The broken edge tells you something too. It reminds you that ancient history reaches the present incomplete. Perhaps the most responsible way to approach these odds is not to fill every silence. Perhaps some silences should remain untouched. For inside the missing lines lies neither proof nor disproof. There is only possibility, and possibility, when handled carefully, can be far more unsettling than certainty. You stand beneath a sky with no visible boundary. Stars hang above the plain in immense silence. Below them, canals reflect thin ribbons of moonlight while distant houses settle into darkness. Somewhere between earth and heaven lies a question. Could anything restrain a god? Not a stronger weapon, not a higher wall, not distance across the heavens. Something more difficult to escape. An accepted order. The phrase higher law sounds modern, and no surviving Sumerian tablet presents a document bearing that title. Ancient Mesopotamian scribes did not leave a universal constitution explaining the rights and limitations of every divine being. The hypothesis must therefore remain cautious. Yet their literature contains several ingredients from which such an idea can reasonably be explored. Destinies are established. Divine offices possess boundaries. Sacred powers belong to particular holders. Assemblies recognize major decisions. Oaths create a obligation. Violations can produce consequences. Together, these features suggest a cosmos where legitimate action matters almost as much as physical capability. You imagine an enormous invisible architecture surrounding the divine world. There are no walls. There are positions. There are no chains. There are obligations. Nothing appears to imprison anyone, yet actions acquire meaning according to where each being stands within the sacred structure. This distinction separates power from authority. A deity may possess enough strength to intervene in human affairs, while lacking recognized permission to do so under certain conditions. That possibility sounds as unusual only because modern storytelling often equates supernatural power with unrestricted freedom. Mesopotamian religion rarely needs that assumption. Its gods possess personalities, domains, rivalries, offices, and relationships. They exist within a populated cosmos. A populated cosmos requires arrangement. Scholars studying Mesopotamian theology at Yale University and the University of Chicago have long examined how concepts of fate, divine decision, temple authority, and sacred kingship contributed to ancient ideas of cosmic organization. The mainstream historical fact is straightforward. Mesopotamian religious texts frequently portray major divine actions as connected with established roles and decisions rather than individual whim alone. That does not prove a single supreme legal code. It does show that divine authority was structured. You can picture the difference through a royal seal. The cylinder itself is small enough to hold in your hand. Rolled across wet clay, however, it creates an image identifying authority. A messenger carrying a sealed document may possess no personal power. The seal gives his message legitimacy. Another man might be physically stronger. Without recognized authority, his command means less. Now enlarge that principle until it reaches heaven. Perhaps divine titles functions in similarly. A god holds an office. The office grants recognized powers. Those powers make certain actions legitimate. If the office is lost, withdrawn, transferred, or restricted, the being may remain powerful while becoming unauthorized. That would create something resembling exile without requiring physical imprisonment. You feel cool night air moving along the river. A distant dog barks. Everything remains ordinary beneath the stars. Yet the idea grows stranger. Suppose a divine group once possessed authority to interact directly with humanity. Then suppose some sacred decision changed that relationship. Direct intervention might become restricted. Communication could continue through dreams, signs, ritual, priesthood, or symbolic presence. The beings themselves would not need to vanish. Their permitted mode of contact would change. This is speculation. The tablets do not state that the Anunnaki were collectively banned from returning to Earth. No securely translated inscription announces such a prohibition. No known text provides a date when that restriction began. The absence of such evidence must remain clear. But an interpretive hypothesis can still ask whether Mesopotamian religious logic makes such restraint conceivable. It does. A binding divine order would need several features. First, authority would have to exist beyond personal desire. Second, recognized decisions would need consequences. Third, membership within divine society would require acceptance of those decisions. Fourth, violations would need to threaten something valuable enough to discourage disobedience. That final point is especially why would a powerful god obey? Fear is one possibility. Legitimacy is another. If divine status depends upon participation in cosmic order, rebellion against that order could cost the very authority making divine action meaningful. A king stripped of kingship may still possess a sword. He is no longer king. A judge removed from office may still understand law. He cannot issue valid judgments. A priest expelled from a sanctuary may still know every ritual. He no longer performs them with recognized standing. The same logic could be imagined at divine scale. This makes higher law less like an external police force and more like the condition under which sacred authority exists. Break the condition, and power remains. Status does not. There is a quirky modern theory that takes this possibility literally. Some fringe writers suggest that the Anunnaki were placed under a cosmic prohibition, preventing them from interfering openly with humanity. Others imagined a non-intervention agreement imposed by beings even more powerful than the Anunnaki. No archaeological evidence establishes either scenario. These ideas belong to modern speculative mythology, yet they accidentally touch a genuinely ancient theme. Permission matters. The difference lies in the details. Ancient texts provide divine order, obligation, and restricted authority. Modern theories add extraterrestrial governments, planetary treaties, and hidden enforcement systems. Those additions are unsupported. The ancient foundation remains enough to sustain a quieter mysteries. Scholars continue debating whether Mesopotamian concepts of cosmic order should be understood as anything resembling natural law. Some historians resist the comparison because natural law belongs to much later philosophical traditions. They prefer to speak of divine decrees, destiny, ritual order, and established functions without merging them into one abstract principle. Other researchers note that the repeated concern with fixed roles and authoritative decisions reveals a meaningful concept of structured reality, even if ancient scribes never systematized it philosophically. The uncertainty is significant. Perhaps there was no single higher law. Perhaps there were many overlapping restraints. Custom, destiny, assembly, oath, sacred office, divine hierarchy. The result could still feel like law without ever becoming one written code. Your mind drifts towards an ancient gate standing closed beneath moonlight. No guard waits outside. No lock hangs from the wood. A powerful being could perhaps break it easily, yet the being does not enter. Why? Because crossing the threshold would mean more than crossing timber and stone. It would violate the relationship defining who may pass. That is the essence of sacred boundaries. Their strength does not come from material resistance. Their strength comes from accepted meaning. Perhaps this offers the calmest interpretation of a forbidden divine return. The barrier would not need to surround Earth. It would not need to hide somewhere beyond the planets. It could exist wherever legitimate presence is determined. A being may approach. A being may observe. A being may even communicate indirectly. Yet full return might require restoration of authority that no individual god can grant himself. The question becomes almost ceremonial. Who recognizes the return? Who restores the office? Who dissolves the prohibition? Who declares that the old boundary no longer applies? If no recognized authority answers, the gate remains closed even without a lock. You listen to water passing quietly through the darkness. The ancient landscape offers no final explanation, only a pattern. Power is everywhere. Permission is quieter. Perhaps that is why permission is easier to miss. And perhaps the strongest law imaginable is not the one that destroys those who disobey. It is the one that makes their power meaningless unless they obey it. You stand at the edge of an ancient city while morning gathers slowly over the plain. Smoke rises from household fires, and merchants arrange jars near doorways before the heat becomes oppressive. Farmers move toward canals carrying tools, while temple servants begin another cycle of offerings and measured responsibilities. The gods remain unseen. Life continues anyway. This may be one of the strangest implications of Mesopotamian religion. A civilization could believe deeply in divine authority while expecting most daily problems to be handled by human hands. Canals still required digging. Walls needed repair. Judges had to settle disputes. Scribes recorded grain. Priests maintained ceremonies. Kings organized armies and labor. Divine power surrounded these activities, yet divine beings did not need to appear physically in every street. Human institutions carried the burden of maintaining order. You can feel this arrangement inside the administrative tablets recovered from Mesopotamian cities. Thousands record deliveries, wages, land, livestock, temple property, loans, and official responsibilities with astonishing attention to detail. Researchers associated with the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago have studied these archives for generations. Their work reveals civilizations governed through organized systems rather than constant appeals for miraculous intervention. The sacred world provided legitimacy. Humans performed the work. This arrangement creates an intriguing possibility. Suppose direct divine intervention became restricted. Civilization might continue almost unveined. A farmer would still irrigate his field. A priest would still prepare offerings. A ruler would still seek sacred approval. The absence of visible gods would not necessarily destroy the system, because human society had already learned to operate through institutions representing divine order. The gate could remain closed. The city could remain alive. You walk toward a temple entrance where carved guardians watch the threshold. Later Mesopotamian civilizations became especially fond of protective figures placed beside important gateways. Some possessed human faces, animal bodies, wings, or other combinations representing supernatural vigilance. Their purpose was not simply decorative. Thresholds were dangerous. A doorway divided one condition from another. Inside and outside, borrower and ordinary, protected and exposed. Mesopotamian ritual treated such boundaries seriously. Protective images could be buried beneath floors or placed near entrances to prevent harmful forces from crossing. The ancient world was filled with invisible traffic. Not every supernatural being was welcome. This fact complicates any simple assumption that divine or spiritual power automatically carried permission to enter human space. Some powers were invited. Others were excluded. Ritual decided the difference. You place your palm against a heavy wooden gate warmed by sunlight. Nothing about the wood looks magical. Yet the threshold possesses meaning because the community has defined what may cross it. Perhaps an entire world could function similarly. The physical boundary might be irrelevant. The meaningful boundary could be everything. Ancient Mesopotamians developed elaborate protective rituals against demons, illnesses, hostile magic, and uncertain supernatural influences. Specialists trained in ritual knowledge prescribed figurines, prayers, purifications, and carefully arranged ceremonies. These practices demonstrate a mainstream historical reality. The supernatural realm was not imagined as one undifferentiated category of powerful beings. There were distinctions. Friendly powers differed from hostile ones. Authorized protection differed from dangerous intrusion. Sacred presence required correct relationships. That principle allows you to imagine divine absence in a new way. Perhaps humanity does not wait helplessly beneath an empty heaven. Perhaps people inherit responsibility. They build laws because divine justice no longer walks visibly through the marketplace. They maintain temples because sacred order requires human guardians. They preserve traditions because memory becomes the bridge between distant powers and present communities. The gods become less like constant rulers and more like foundations beneath civilization. A foundation does not need to enter the room. It simply needs to remain beneath it. This possibility also explains why kingship becomes so important. The ruler stands between ordinary society and divine legitimacy. He does not replace the gods completely. He translates sacred order into human administration. A good ruler restores temples, protects boundaries, settles disputes, maintains canals, and presents himself as guardian of an arrangement larger than personal ambition. Royal inscriptions often emphasize precisely these duties. The king builds, the king repairs, the king restores. The language of restoration matters because political authority presents itself as preservation rather than invention. Human rulers do not announce a new cosmos each morning. They claim to maintain the proper one. Scholars continue debating how ordinary people understood this relationship between divine will and human responsibility. Some historians emphasize royal ideology, noting that surviving inscriptions often reflect elite interests rather than popular belief. Others examine private letters, prayers, contracts, and household rituals to recover a more varied religious landscape. The debate remains open because no single archive speaks for everyone. Still, one pattern remains difficult to ignore. People acted as though order required maintenance. That maintenance was largely human. A curious fringe theory imagines humanity living under an ancient non-intervention agreement. According to some modern speculation, powerful beings may observe Earth while being prohibited from openly interfering with human development. There is no archaeological evidence demonstrating such an agreement. No known Mesopotamian tablet records a cosmic treaty imposing modern ideas of planetary non-intervention. Yet the appeal of the theory reveals something interesting. People sense that absence and power are not opposites. A being could remain powerful while remaining distant. A guardian could exist without entering. A ruler could retain authority without appearing physically before every subject. This is where the closed gate becomes more than an image. Imagine that ancient divine beings once occupied roles connected with human civilization. Now imagine that those roles no longer permit direct presence. Their power might remain intact. Their knowledge might remain intact. Their interest in humanity might remain intact. Only permission has changed. Such a restriction would explain why human responsibility becomes increasingly important without requiring divine disappearance. The world becomes a place where people must act. There is something almost unsettling about that. A visible God can be blamed. A distant God leaves decisions in human hands. You hear the sound of a judge beginning work inside a public building. Two families wait with witnesses. A scribe prepares clay. No divine figure descends to settle the dispute. Humans must interpret justice. Elsewhere, a farmer repairs a damaged canal bank. No supernatural hand lifts the mud. People carry baskets themselves. Perhaps this is what life beneath a closed gate would actually look like. Ordinary, difficult, responsible. The ancient order remains present through expectation rather than spectacle. A law survives because people continue recognizing it. A sacred boundary survives because people continue treating it as meaningful. The disappearance of these original guardians would not automatically erase what they established. An institution could outlive its founder. A city can preserve a law long after the king who issued it becomes dust. Perhaps divine arrangements within mythology could endure in the same way. You look across the plain as evening settles over fields divided by narrow waterways. Temple walls catch the last red light. Families return home. The heavens remain quiet. Nothing approaches from above. Nothing needs to. If the ancient order still holds, silence may be part of its operation. Perhaps the beings once associated with that order cannot simply return because desire alone is insufficient. Perhaps the gate remains closed because the authority required to open it has never been restored. And humanity continues beneath that invisible boundary, maintaining a world whose oldest guardians may still possess power, but no longer possess permission. Night settles over the Mesopotamian plain with almost no ceremony. The final warmth leaves the mud brick walls, and narrow canals turn black beneath the stars. Reeds move softly at the water's edge while the city grows quiet behind you. Nothing descends from the sky. Nothing announces itself. Perhaps silence is the final evidence ancient history offers. You look upward and understand how easily absence becomes a mystery. Human beings are remarkably good at imagining movement behind closed doors, voices beyond walls, and intentions hidden inside scenes. Ancient Mesopotamians were no different. Their gods could remain unseen while still influencing kingship, weather, Fertility, judgment, dreams, and destiny, divine invisibility, did not automatically mean divine disappearance. Presence could take quieter forms. A dream might carry warning. An omen might suggest danger. A ritual might renew sacred relationships. A king might interpret victory as divine approval. A household might experience unexpected misfortune and search for supernatural meaning. The gods did not need to walk visibly through crowded streets to remain part of reality. That historical fact creates a subtle problem for modern ideas about the Anunnaki. If divine presence was never limited to physical appearance, asking when they will physically return may impose a modern expectation upon an ancient religious concept. The ancient question might have sounded different. Are they still part of the order? That's harder to answer. Mesopotamian texts never announced that the Anunnaki collectively died, ceased existing, or permanently vanished from the cosmos. They continue appearing within religious traditions whose meanings change through time. Their functions shift. Their associations shift. Their prominence changes. But disappearance is not the central theme of themes. A divine category can fade from political importance while remaining inside sacred literature. Researchers at major institutions, including Yale University and the University of Oxford, have shown through the study of cuneiform traditions that Mesopotamian religion constantly transformed while preserving ancient divine names. Gods could be elevated. Others could become less prominent. Some merge with related figures. Some survive mainly in scholarly lists, rituals, or inherited literature. Religious memory rarely follows a straight path. It layers one age upon another. You imagine a Babylonian scholar copying a divine list centuries after the earliest Sumerian cities have changed beyond recognition. He writes names already ancient in his lifetime. Perhaps he understands them differently from the scribes who first preserved them. Still, he copies the Riek. Memory continues through his hand. That's one way a god refuses to disappear, not through physical immortality proven by archaeology. Through cultural persistence, a name survives the people who first spoke it. A story survives the temple where it was performed. A divine role survives inside clay long after political systems collapse. This kind of survival is less spectacular than an immortal being watching humanity secretly from somewhere beyond the planets. It is also demonstrably real. The Anunnaki survived Mesopotamia. Their name eventually entered modern books, films, discussions, speculative theories, and digital culture. People who have never seen a cuneiform tablet now recognize a divine term first written thousands of years ago. That is an astonishing return in itself, but mythology invites memory. A possibility. Suppose that a divine existence, within the logic of those ancient traditions, doesn't depend upon continuous human observation. A neglected god might remain a god. A closed temple might not erase the deity. An abandoned city might lose sacred presence without destroying the divine being associated with it. Then absence becomes ambiguous. Something can be absent from human experience without being absent from the cosmic order. You hear the slow movement of water beside the bank. A cool breeze crosses the plain. Your mind naturally asks where such beings would be. The tablets offer no verified hidden location. No ancient observatory records an Anunnaki refuge beyond a known planet. No securely translated inscription explains that they wait inside mountains, beneath oceans, or beyond the solar system. Those locations belong to later speculation. The authentic mystery concerns status rather than geography. Where does a divine being exist when its earthly relationship has ended? Ancient religion may not require a location answer. The god exists within sacred reality. Modern thought wants coordinates. That difference produces endless confusion. A quirky fringe idea suggests that the Anunnaki remain nearby but cannot reveal themselves because some superior law forbids direct intervention. Other modern theories imagine observers waiting for humanity to reach a particular stage before contact becomes permissible. There is no archaeological evidence confirming either scenario. Still, the underlying structure resembles something deeply familiar within ancient Mesopotamian thought. Authority can wait. A decision can remain effective across generations. A sacred status can persist even when circumstances change. Time does not necessarily dissolve obligation. That last point deserves quietation. Human laws often expire because governments collapse. Contracts fail because institutions disappear. Ancient mythology imagines cosmic decisions differently. A divine decree can shape the destiny of a city for generations. An oath can matter because sacred authority stands beyond one human lifetime. The gods inhabit longer time. Their obligations can therefore inhabit longer time as well. Perhaps a prohibition upon divine presence. If ancient storytellers had imagined one, it would not need constant enforcement. It would remain valid because the structure granting divine legitimacy remained valid. There would be no countdown, no approaching date, no secret astronomical alarm. Only condition. The scholarly debate here must remain especially careful. Historians generally avoid reconstructing a universal Mesopotamian theology from scattered texts produced across different centuries and cities. Some scholars emphasize continuity within divine hierarchy and cosmic order. Others emphasize historical change, local variation, and literary context. The surviving evidence supports structure. It does not support one complete hidden constitution. That uncertainty prevents a definitive answer. Perhaps there was no higher law in the philosophical sense. Perhaps what appears like one law was actually a web of obligations and destiny. Hierarchy. Oath. Ritual legitimacy. Sacred office. Collective judgment. Proper boundaries. No single thread restrains everything. Together, they form a net. You can imagine even a powerful divine being caught inside such a structure without becoming physically helpless. It could still act, but action outside legitimate order would become rebellion. A return without recognition would become intrusion. Presence without sacred relationship would become something different from rightful presence. This gives the old question an unexpected shape. Perhaps the Anunnaki do not need to be imprisoned somewhere. Perhaps they do not need to be travelling toward Earth. Perhaps the ancient religious imagination allows something more subtle. They could remain part of a cosmic order while no longer holding a rightful place within ordinary human space. In that case, returning would require more than arrival. It would require restoration. Who could grant that restoration? The texts offer no final authority clearly standing beyond every god. There are senior divine figures. There are assemblies. There are destinies. There are sacred powers. Yet nothing survives that allows a modern reader to identify one unquestionable cosmic legislator. That absence may be the most appropriate ending. The system is visible. Its ultimate source remains hidden. You stand beneath the stars while the ruined cities sleep beneath layers of earth. Clay tablets rest in museums thousands of miles away. Some are translated. Some remain disputed. Some have never been completely understood. Others may still lie underground. The Anunnaki remain inside those fragments, not waiting like characters behind a curtain, but suspended between ancient theology and modern imagination. Perhaps they vanished. Perhaps they never existed beyond mythology. Perhaps, within the world imagined by the scribes, they never truly left. And perhaps something older than any named god still determines when presence becomes permitted. Word count 1175. The night grows softer now. You no longer need to solve the tablets. Let the broken signs remain where they are. Pressed into clay beneath the patient weight of centuries, let the old cities rest beneath dust, salt, reeds, and moonlight. The canals continue quietly through your imagination. Water touches mud banks. A distant breeze passes through date palms. Somewhere beyond the fields, a temple wall catches the faint light of stars that ancient scribes once watched with the same human wonder you might feel tonight. Nothing needs to return. Nothing needs to disappear. The mystery can remain suspended between those possibilities. Perhaps human beings have always lived this way, beneath systems larger than themselves, sensing boundaries whose beginnings they cannot remember. A king inherits a throne. A priest inherits a ritual. A scribe inherits words. A child inherits a world already filled with rules, names, stories, and expectations. You inherit question. Some questions become answers. Others become companions. The Anunnaki belong among those companions now, figures shaped by ancient religion, reshaped by the modern imagination, and still surrounded by unanswered possibilities. Let those possibilities grow quiet. You do not need hidden planets. You do not need secret gates opening above the desert. There is only the calm thought that power may never be the highest thing. Perhaps order stands deeper. Perhaps obligation survives longer. Perhaps even beings imagined as divine could remain beneath laws they did not fully command. The stars offer no confirmation. They simply remain. Your breathing becomes slower as the ancient plane fades into darkness. Clay returns to earth. Footsteps disappear. Temple lamps dim. The final canal reflects one narrow line of moonlight. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. Good night.